A gloomy world, all the smells of which now consisted of sweat and blood, swallowed the entire earth. Only a few managed to survive in the dark and deserted corridors filled with zombies. Ray Sidcroft was one of those who went through level after level with the team in order to survive. His friends always obediently followed the hero, who led them to victory again and again. Ideas for salvation never faded within Ray, who could boast of strength and intelligence. That is why his allies have come to rely only on the wise guidance of Sidcroft. They chose a favorable position for themselves, since the guy never abandoned his friends in trouble. No matter how many zombies were chasing the team, it didn't matter to Ray. The hero wanted to survive so much that he came up with new and amazing ways to fight every time. Although zombies possessed enormous strength and speed, they remained incredibly stupid after death, so people managed to escape from them, although they often suffered great losses. The zombie space was a separate dimension, the destruction of which did not affect the real world. For 5 years, Ray Sidcroft had been surviving in such places as they sprang up all over the world. During this time, he assembled a small team of people with whom he traveled across dimensions. The only way to escape from the deadly dimensions was through huge magical gates. As soon as the hero completed the mission of the dimension, he immediately received the opportunity to leave it. And thus, the whole world lived from the moment measurements began to appear in all countries. More often than not, people didn't even notice how they accidentally ended up in newly opened portals. Inside, huge crowds of zombies were always waiting for them, their number increasing with each death. The only way to escape was through the gate. Otherwise, after the time ran out, you too would become a zombie. People who managed to survive at high levels were especially valued in society. And today, Ray finally had the opportunity to go through the most difficult zone with his friends. Sidcroft trusted them more than he trusted himself, for the boys never let him down. Victory was so close to them, as they were just a short distance away from the safety zone. But as luck would have it, they encountered a terrible boss in the final minutes of the portal's operation. No matter how trained Sidcroft was, he would not have been able to cope with this monster. The creature was at such a high level that no one had any desire to approach it. The entire team barely dodged one powerful blow, and more were expected to follow. For the past 5 years, Ray has been surviving to get through this brutal final level. And now there was another obstacle in his path, in the form of a new type of powerful zombie. The girl looked as if she had received several powerful abilities at once. The friends only had a few potions left that they could use in this situation. As the leader of the group, Sidcroft took it upon himself to distract the girl in order to save the others. The guy didn't hope to defeat her. He just wanted to buy time so that his friends could help him later. It was only for this reason that he drank the strength potion instead of taking more speed for himself in battle. But suddenly Ray felt a wave of weakness. Although this certainly shouldn't have happened, the hero couldn't even imagine that his friends would switch the potion at such an important moment. The fact was that his friend Roger Nudie had long been planning to overthrow the powerful Sidcroft. Everyone else supported Roger, as he was their leader even before the zombie apocalypse. That's why none of the group of former friends were worried about the death of the experienced Ray. They couldn't defeat him any other way, so they left him to be devoured by the zombies. Roger had planned to leave Sidcroft from the very beginning, and only now did the opportunity arise. It so happened that all the friends shared Nucci's opinion, since they had belonged to the same rich group before. That's why, at the first opportunity, Roger sacrificed Ray, who never had any money. Such was their life, the cruelty of which was brought about by the very people who abandoned their friends. The hero did so much for his comrades, only to find out that they did not consider him a true friend. At that moment, the pain and despair inside Sidcroft replaced all fear of imminent death. He tried to survive for so many years, and as a result, he was set up by his own friends. The physical wounds from a zombie attack didn't hurt as much as actual betrayal. Ray always tried to help those who were weaker than him, and now it played a bad role for him. At the last moment of his life, the hero dreamed only of one day taking revenge on those traitors. After the portal closed, he was destined to become one of those zombies that would forever haunt people. Consciousness was gradually slipping away from Ray, no matter how hard he tried to hold on to it. Soon, the young man completely forgot who he was and what he wanted to do in the future. But at the very last moment, Ray suddenly came to his senses, finding himself outside the apocalypse. The guy in front of him was definitely Ron Groom, who constantly bullied the weaklings at school. Everyone on the set was so relaxed, as if they had never heard of zombies. Now all the boys were worried about was how to avoid Ron's wrath, which no one forgave. Noah Meloz was one of Groom's main victims, just like Ray himself was back in school. It took the hero a while to realize that they were actually in a schoolyard, and that his old enemies were nearby. Everything around seemed very real, despite the fact that Ray had only recently died from the claws of a zombie. Ron, as usual, was shaking money out of those who were too weak to talk back. Sidcroft remembered well how often he got into trouble because Noah dumped all the problems on him. Somehow, he found himself back in time, to a time when Groom still posed a huge threat to him. The boy was considered one of the strongest in school because he was not afraid to fight anyone. That's why he was always flush with money, because he was extracting it from those who couldn't defend themselves. But this time, everything was completely different, because Sidcroft retained some of the power from his past life. While Ron didn't expect at all that some loser would suddenly resist him, none of the students believed their eyes when Ray sent Groom flying with one blow. Everyone is used to seeing how Ron easily and quickly deals with enemies, taking their last money. But for some reason, Ray no longer seemed like a victim to anyone, because his gaze instantly frightened everyone. For a long time, all the teachers turned a blind eye to the antics of the impudent Groom, who was the leader among the school children. At that moment, Ray became one of the first targets for Ron, since he had no defenders at all. Sidcroft's parents died early, leaving the boy with no one to complain to about the beatings. No one dared to interfere in Ron's squabbles, because otherwise the guy would turn on them. So for many years in a row at school, the hero was forced to give all the money to an impudent bandit. Groom never knew pity, as his older acquaintances taught him to be formidable and cruel. But after his rebirth, Ray was no longer the weak guy who gave away his last money. So fear flashed in Ron's eyes, which, for the first time in his life, were faced with resistance. The mere blow was perceived by Groom's friends as incredible impudence, since everyone had been silent before. No matter how many people attacked the hero in response, he was ready to repel any attack. Over the past 5 years, Sidcroft has become the most powerful fighter, although his skills have only partially remained. But this was more than enough for people who didn't really know how to fight properly. They couldn't imagine how much pain Ray had to endure since the apocalypse. The guy couldn't rest for even a minute, as the zombies were ready to tear him apart at any moment. For the sake of his friends, Sidcroft was on the brink of death many times, not sparing his body in dangerous moments. Therefore, all the movements of the current opponents were too slow for young Ray. His heart still remembered the pain of betrayal, but no one else had the memories. The hero could hardly believe that everything that was happening was real and not a dream after his death. As soon as he woke up, Ray swore that he would definitely take revenge on those who betrayed him in the past. The young man had no complaints against the school children, but they were the first to attack him. Ron never thought he would ever get into trouble because of a victim. Ray no longer looked like a soft target since no one could get close to him. If only Noah had known about Sidcroft's power in advance, he would never have drawn attention to him. Until the very end, Groom did not believe that the former weakling was truly capable of defeating everyone. But Ray easily proved to him that he would never lose to the school bullies again. For the first time in his life, Ron realized that he was afraid to look into the eyes of the boy he had previously bullied. Their roles in society had changed, and now Groom was the target of a powerful rival. But the guy always quickly gathered around him those who were ready to humiliate his weak targets. But for some reason, at that moment, none of Groom's assistants dared to come closer. The boys quickly realized that they shouldn't have stood up to Ray, who seemed so strong. The fight with Ron ended too quickly, and Ray just wanted to know today's date. As a result, the hero scared everyone so much that after his victory, no one remained on the court. Only Noah did not manage to escape in time, although he planned to disappear unnoticed. The young man suspected that Sidcroft would then take an interest in him, and he was completely right in these fears. The hero did not rest until he had beaten out of Noah all the answers to the questions that interested him. It turned out that he appeared a month before the apocalypse, and his skills were partially preserved from that time. But the most important part, in the form of inventory, was now at the first level, as if it had not developed at all. Soon the whole world will once again be plunged into the abyss of an apocalypse, the causes of which are unknown. People will remain in shock for a long time again, until zombies begin to slowly take over territories. It was only by a miracle that Ray managed to survive the first waves of zombies, which were especially deadly due to his lack of knowledge. Quest zones appeared randomly all over the land, making it impossible to find a quiet spot. That's why each person was given an inventory in which to hide resources. In the past, Sid Croft developed this ability so strongly that practically no one could beat him in terms of reserves. The hero planned to use all his knowledge to reach heights even faster. After all, in his current state, he could do nothing to resist the traitors he would soon see. Even after his rebirth, Ray still didn't know much about the brutal laws of the local bandits. They mercilessly beat up anyone who owed them money or who for some reason they didn't like. All the dirty work was done by assistants, while their boss always remained somewhere in the shadows. And the hero was yet to meet this man, because he had heard a lot about him. Ron was one of the evil boss's subordinates, and so he crawled to him on his knees after the fight. But the young man did not find support from Hazel Toms, since he treated everyone equally. The man hated it when employees, for some reason, did not fulfill his demands. The hierarchy was strictly observed in this gang, so every loser was severely punished. Groom was on the verge of getting hit on the head for not bringing in any money. But at the last moment, Hazel took pity on the guy, because before he always brought everything needed on time. Rumors quickly spread throughout the school, so soon the hero knew that Hazel's boys would come for him. He remembered that this man had survived for a long time in the apocalypse world, so he could be useful. Toms was initially one of the best athletes, but at some point, he went down the wrong path. He was overcome with rage and cruelty, which is why the promising guy was expelled. Hazel didn't stay upset for long, as he soon formed his own gang and occupied good territory. Noah had encountered Toms once before, so he was now worried about Sid Croft's future. But the classmate did not have time to warn the hero about the danger, since the gang had already arrived. No one noticed that there was not a drop of fear in Ray's gaze when he saw Tom's assistance. No matter how hard Noah tried to stop the mad Sid Croft, the hero wanted to meet Hazel. Only the hero knew that hordes of zombies would appear all over the world, and he needed a team. And it was most logical to gather it from people who already had considerable influence in society. So Ray didn't resist when the guys led him arm in arm to their boss's car. No one dared to help Sid Croft because people were afraid to oppose Hazel. If only the bandits knew that it was not they who brought Ray, but he who deigned to obey them. Toms used all his energy to put pressure on the guy who dared to hit his assistants. He had been the boss for several years already, and therefore sincerely believed that no one could cope with him. But Sid Croft was well aware of how precarious the position of a leader was in an emergency. Ray planned to pretend to be quiet and calm for a long time, but suddenly the bandits attacked. Although the boys easily won the fights, it was only because of their useful and varied weapons, so they didn't have a chance against a hero who had fought only with his fists for many years. Ray's body perfectly remembered all the techniques that he had worked so hard on since the start of the apocalypse. No matter what big guys got in Sid Croft's way, he kept everything under good control. Even when the guy was finally captured, Ray didn't panic for a second about it. All the bandits were inspired as soon as their friend immobilized the enemy for a while, as if something like that could actually stop a hero who was stronger. No one even noticed how soon Ray easily and naturally freed himself from the grip. The bandits didn't have time to regroup, so some of them attacked Sid Croft anyway. But the hero was no longer immobilized, so nothing prevented him from repelling all attacks. To such weak opponents, Ray looked like he was a true god in battle. Only one blow reached Sid Croft, because the opponents were many times more numerous. Ron was most worried about his friends, as he wanted to take revenge on Ray for his recent humiliation in front of everyone. But it turned out that even such a vile blow did not reach its target, because Sid Croft managed to defend himself. The bandits tried every method, but were unable to get close to such a good fighter. Nothing but defeat awaited them, as Ray had been desperately fighting for his life for several years. And now it was too easy for him in the battle with people who were many times weaker than zombies. Hazel clearly didn't expect some schoolboy to deal with his gang so quickly. All this time, Ron was sure that Ray would not be able to defeat even one bandit in their company. And now Sid Croft stood before the boss, and not a drop of fatigue was visible on his face. Of course, Toms would never forgive the impudent man who dealt with his friends. He has been trained in fighting since childhood, so he has never lost a fight. But even with all his skills, Hazel couldn't hit Ray even once. Emotions clouded Tom's judgment, as anger always quickly made him lose his temper. The man didn't believe that the guy in front of him was really just an ordinary schoolboy. The boss's defeat was swift and spectacular. Although Hazel had never embarrassed himself like that before. Who would have thought that one day the great Hazel would have to lie on the floor with everyone else? Ron couldn't do anything in this situation, although he felt guilty because he brought Ray. Tom's intuition told him that he would never be able to defeat this guy in his life. He wanted to lead a quiet life as a bandit, protecting only his own territory in this city. But it was at that moment that something went wrong. As Hazel could no longer be an authority figure, the man realized with horror that it was he who Ray needed. Although the guy did not reveal the reasons, during his time as boss, Tom's had made connections and he reached out to them. He knew that Harry Hills had good power because he had gathered skilled people around him. That's why Hazel came to the man who ruled the neighboring territories for help. Harry was a notorious bandit, so the fees for his work were always exorbitant. He did not hesitate to assert his rights to the territory of Tom's, since he needed help. Hazel was ashamed to admit that he couldn't handle just one student. If only the man had defeated Ray on his own, this situation would not have happened. However, Tom's did not have time to accept Harry's conditions, as an unknown guest appeared in the room. Sidcroft only pretended to let Tom's go, although in fact he was watching his actions. The hero knew that Hazel could be trusted, so he was going to make him his comrade. He deliberately hid in the apartment for a while so that no one would suspect anything. But in reality, the young man trained hard because his body was still too weak. Ray wanted to reach the level he had during the apocalypse as quickly as possible. But everything took time. So now the guy could barely cope with heavy exercises. But this did not stop him from showing up at the enemy's lair to lift Hazel to the top. Harry couldn't ignore the man who had so brazenly walked right into the center of his base. And only Tom's recognized in this schoolboy the same guy who had recently defeated all the bandits. Hills naively counted on the support of his gang, but there was no one left of it. On the way here, Sidcroft personally dealt with everyone who tried to stop his plan. No one in the room believed that Ray could beat every bandit, and only Tom's knew it. But it was useless to explain anything to Harry, since the man only believed in his fists. But as soon as the guy pounced on Hazel, he instantly lost his weapon. Hills was absolutely certain that the bottle should not have broken in the air. He didn't even notice how the hero, with one precise throw, prevented Harry from killing his colleague. Harry's assistants were still eagerly awaiting his command to begin active combat. But Hills didn't care about the boy, because he only wanted to deal with Hazel. Now Tom's came without security, and alone he would not have been able to deal with everyone at once. So Harry had a good opportunity to gain more territory. Of course, Hazel would not give up his life without a fight, because he was used to defending himself. He did not spare any of Harry's assistants, who were now only hindering his escape. Meanwhile, some of the guys tried to attack Ray, but it seemed like they could do anything to him. Sidcroft did not boast of his abilities, but he demonstrated them well in practice. So the bandits scattered in all directions with such speed as if they were little children. After what Ray went through during the apocalypse, no man could defeat him. Every move Sidcroft made was confident and precise, as if he had fought like this before. Harry didn't expect his best men to be knocked to the floor so quickly, while Ray wasn't even out of breath, and he had just beaten those who were heavier than him. As soon as Hills gave the order, the remaining bandits immediately attacked just one guy. But Sidcroft didn't even blink an eye, since they moved slower than some zombies. So the guy accepted the fight bravely, because he was not used to giving up at the very beginning because of such trifles. Once again, the bandits took turns flying aside while Ray remained unharmed. But no one dared to run away shamefully, because Harry would not hesitate to kill as punishment. That's why every Hills assistant acted recklessly, trying to defeat just one schoolboy. The bandits attacked desperately all together, but this did not save them from painful blows in return. Soon, many began to feel that they would never defeat this young man in their lives. Even when someone managed to grab Sidcroft, the others simply did not have time to strike in time. Ray easily dealt blows to his attackers, which were still too weak for him. Sidcroft would only have lost if he had suddenly been shot in the heart. Until then, no enemy would be able to hit him even once during the entire battle. The speed and power with which Ray acted would strike terror into any enemy, and Harry was no exception, as for the first time in a long time, an unpleasant shudder gripped him. Although it was unfair, the man pointed the gun at the schoolboy who fought well. In the heat of battle, Sidcroft did not pay attention to this, and it was almost too late for him. But at the very last moment, Hazel saved Ray, despite the fact that he was not on his side. Tom suddenly realized that without this strange young man, he would not get out of here alive. This unexpected support came in very handy, as Ray was able to focus on the fight. But this made Hazel a lifelong enemy in Harry, who hated resistance. Tom's only needed to hold out a little longer until the schoolboy came to his aid, and the man did well with Hills because they were in roughly the same shape. But it all ended in Hazel's favor, as Harry got his gun back. No force could save against such a weapon, since the bullets could not be reflected. All this time, Tom's considered himself invincible, but it turned out that he was very wrong. However, at the very last moment, Ray still appeared nearby to save the reliable Hazel. So this bloody battle ended with Tom's victory, although he did not believe that he would survive. If it weren't for Sidcroft's help, the man would have long ago been left without territory and money. Until now, he did not understand the motives of Ray, who so bravely helped him after the recent meeting. Personally, Hazel would never get involved in something like that, because the bandits might start hunting. But the hero didn't care about other people, because he wanted to see Hazel at the top. After being reborn, the former schoolboy became a completely different person and had no intention of losing. It wasn't by chance that he chose Tom's for himself, because the bandit always had a lot of money, while now the hero was not working, and therefore he barely had enough for food and housing. But none of this mattered to Ray, because he knew that soon money would have no value. Now he was planning to gather people for himself whom he could count on in the apocalypse. At that moment, the hero had no idea how difficult a goal he had set for himself. The whole point was that Hazel was only responsible for a few territories, and there were more bandits, and the most important of them has long been Jared Broy, who is rarely seen. Tom's tried to participate in all the chapter's events in order to remain in good standing, but at heart he remained a small man, though Sidcroft planned to change that. Hazel's life was changing rapidly, and the man didn't understand if it was for the better. What he knew for sure was that there was no way to get rid of the attentive Sidcroft now. But if the guy really does lift him to the top, then Tom's will be ready to obey him in the future. He always dreamed of occupying some prominent position, but he didn't have enough strength for it. Soon, Hazel's assistants finally arrived at the building, although they were significantly late, so no one had to fight, because Ray personally dealt with each of Harry's bandits. The hero had no desire to communicate with his classmate, who had bullied him for several years, and Grom himself was now afraid to approach Sidcroft, who was displaying such amazing abilities. But Hazel had other plans, as he needed to stay in constant contact with Ray. That's why the man gave the assistant's phone to the hero, because the latter had already broken his cell phone a long time ago. But Sidcroft could no longer call anyone his friend after the recent betrayal, so he planned to stay out of the way, but at the same time gradually develop his people. Ron never thought he would get into so much trouble because of one classmate. Ray turned the entire bandit system upside down in one day by uniting two huge territories. Hazel had only had a short conversation with Sidcroft, but he sensed his thirst for blood and revenge. This made everyone around him feel uneasy, and only the hero behaved the same way as in his past life. The only difference was in his skills and goals, which had changed somewhat after the betrayal. So, as soon as Ray saw Roger's face, a powerful wave of rage washed over his entire body. The guy seemed nice and handsome to everyone around him, but all of this was just a false mask of a good actor. In the past, Nucci took most of the resources for himself in a short period of time when zombies appeared, and now the guy was among the rich population, so Ray could not get close to him. The young man could only gradually approach Roger to make him feel all the pain. Until then, Sidcroft was going to raise the people he had already accepted into his team. The hero was so deep in thought that he didn't immediately notice that he was bothering some people at the bus stop. He didn't expect that sudden hallucinations would overtake him, as if zombies had already appeared nearby. But people were still people. Although Ray's intuition told him that something was happening, he definitely saw the change in the girl's face. But it only happened for a moment. Sidcroft did not deny the fact that stress could have caused him to hallucinate. Although this did not happen in his past life, after his reincarnation, Ray constantly felt strange. But the story of hallucinations did not end there, as Sidcroft heard something again. Fear completely overwhelmed the guy, since he was not prepared for the apocalypse to begin right now. While right next to him, A portal opened to a dimension where zombies existed. Ray couldn't pass by, because such portals were supposed to appear much later. All the people around behaved so calmly, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. Only the hero, for some reason, saw a portal that was dangerous for ordinary people. There was no way Sid Croft would pass up such an opportunity, because he needed to become stronger. Only in such dimensions were there resources that allowed one to thoroughly upgrade one's personal inventory. So Ray had no doubts about his decision, even though it could lead to his quick death. As soon as he entered the zone, the guy's heart began to pound loudly in anticipation of battle. He couldn't even imagine that he would see zombies so soon, because the apocalypse was supposed to start later. As usual, a window with a task appeared in front of the guy, which allowed him to find a way out. If Sid Croft fails, he will join the zombies in this dimension after the time has passed. The young man understood that it would be difficult for him to immediately find the exit zone and still complete the task, but he didn't even think about getting discouraged, because he was already stronger than when he first appeared in the portal. So Ray immediately began preparing for battle, because the zombies didn't scare him at all this time. He hoped to find good resources, since how much the hero would develop his inventory depended on them. In the past, people constantly competed for crystals, from which many things could be made. This is why Sid Croft was so keen to find as many of these useful elements as possible in the dimension. As long as he stayed within the safe area, his life was not in danger from the zombies. But it was impossible to remain in place indefinitely, because the test time was strictly limited. Ray didn't know what to expect from this dimension, which had formed too early. It was clear to him that with such a weak body, he had to be more careful when meeting zombies. If before, the guy would have easily melted with them at the first levels, now he hasn't leveled up yet. Sid Croft moved gradually to avoid accidentally running into an enemy that was too dangerous too early. But everything didn't go according to his plan from the very beginning, as the zombies almost immediately discovered their target. Although this corpse was of the weakest level, its strength and speed still surpassed that of humans. In his current state, the hero could well have died even from such an attack, if he had not been so careful. Ray knew that zombies always pursued their target to the last, as they felt only wild hunger. Now, even such a weak opponent was dangerous for him, since he was capable of infecting him. But the past had taught Sid Croft well where the zombies' only weak points were. So the guy dealt with this representative of the dead quickly. Although he had less strength, the hero couldn't allow himself to be surrounded. Otherwise, he wouldn't have survived even on the first level of the portal. But the worst thing for Sid Croft would be an encounter with a mutated zombie, since he was without a team. As luck would have it, it was at that moment that one of these zombies spotted easy prey. This guy retained the special skills he developed during his life, and they grew into something terrible. The hero would never have thought that in his very first portal he would encounter such a dangerous enemy. The mutant's strength far exceeded that of a human, and he also possessed a fierce rage and a thirst for blood. So only his improved skills saved Ray from harm, even though he did get hit. There was no talk of any direct combat with the mutant, because now Sid Croft was completely alone. Even if the hero had taken a team with him, it would have been unlikely for all of them to defeat this zombie. So now, escaping was the best solution, because only a suitable location would help us win. The dead man moved on instinct, which only made him look more like a terrible and hungry monster. As Ray feared, he was soon surrounded by other zombies who were also hungry. As soon as the mutant noticed the man, he followed him closely, wanting to taste young blood. But this time, Sid Croft wasn't going to die so easily and quickly, because he had a plan. The guy wanted to live until he plunged his former friends into the abyss of real fear. At the moment of betrayal, he experienced terrible pain, and now he dreamed of sharing it with Roger. However, the young man was still moving too slowly to escape from the mutant. The dead man knew exactly what he wanted, and now he urgently needed to fill his stomach with a human. But the hero didn't intend to become a victim again, because it would lead to nothing. He fought so desperately because his life and the future of his new acquaintances depended on his successful actions. But the zombie wasn't going to give up either, even though not a single intelligent thought was running through his head. The problem was that Ray had too little space to make good attacks, so the zombie quickly blocked all his actions, as if the hero was an ant in strength to him. The young man understood that he would not get far unless he quickly came up with some kind of good plan. With his current abilities, he could barely harm the mutant, but he needed to win somehow. The situation was much worse than the hero initially thought when he agreed to the test. He no longer had any plan of action to get out of the portal painlessly. This time, Sidcroft was lucky, because he accidentally found that very safe zone with an exit. But the question still remained: how to get to that place and defeat the zombies? The mutant was so hungry that he did not spare himself while trying to catch a tasty person. So far, the hero had managed to escape from the monster in time, but his capture was only a matter of time. As soon as the mutant flew over the fence, hope for salvation appeared in the young man's eyes. But the zombie turned out to be so strong and powerful that it easily climbed back to its victim. And again, the hero had no options but to escape, because he did not want to die so quickly. Although zombies were stupid by nature, they had good hearing and quickly gathered in the direction of sounds. It was much easier to deal with regular zombies than with mutants, since they were only slightly stronger. But even on these fights, Ray spent too much time, and he had a limitation on the task. When it came to his life, Sidcroft acted with confidence and speed to survive. Only thanks to these character traits did the hero manage to survive the apocalypse for many years. He simply didn't let the zombies get close to him, as he skillfully used their stupidity against his enemies. As a result, ordinary zombies flew apart with such speed as if they weighed nothing at all. But the dead did not feel pain, so they rose immediately after falling, not wanting to give up. Sidcroft put every blow into his hands as if it were his last, because otherwise he might die. His determination would have frightened any human, but the zombies felt no emotion. True, in each such battle, Ray spent too much energy, and he also needed to stay alive. While the hero was dealing with ordinary zombies, the mutant again moved to decisive action. But he didn't have much brains, so he accidentally created a pretty good dust curtain for Ray. The zombie planned to hit the man, but Sidcroft dodged the fatal blow in time, so the mutant soon lost the trail, although he tried so desperately to reach the target. The parking lot was so huge that it was unclear where exactly the hero had managed to hide. This respite was barely enough for Ray to bandage his recently received wounds. For the first time in a long time, he found himself in such a difficult situation, because he was always with friends, and here the guy had to personally repel the attacks of a mutant who had completely lost his temper. As soon as the zombie noticed the man again, he used all his abilities to catch him. The mutant's strength was enough to crush a huge bus after a while. This meant that such a place was no longer safe for a hero who was a weak person. Once again, he barely dodged the attack of a mutant who was aiming to feast on his victim. But Ray was not as weak as he seemed, as he had the courage to attack back. The young man understood that he should at least weaken the monster so that it could not pursue him. But Sidcroft's weapon was almost broken, while the zombie remained almost intact. Rage seized the stupid dead man the moment he couldn't find his hand in place. As the hero expected, the zombie then acted without any plan, turning itself into a battering ram. But Ray was prepared for this attack, as he expected to cut off the monster's second arm with one blow. But the mutant's skin turned out to be much stronger than it seemed at first glance. So Sidcroft did almost no damage to him, although he put all his remaining strength into the blow. Ray no longer had any plan for salvation, because the monster turned out to be much stronger. But the young man fought so desperately because he had only recently received the chance to be reborn. But all this was not enough, as the zombies also became stronger and somewhat smarter than before. At this moment, Sidcroft felt most hurt by the fact that he had not been able to take revenge on the traitors. All his efforts went down the drain in the very first portal, and they were even more difficult. The hero was so desperate that he couldn't even scream, as even more zombies would have run towards him. But it turned out that not everything was over, as Ray heard a female voice again. The strong woman Sidcroft had met before his death had once again intervened in his life. So soon the young man opened his eyes, although he had only recently come to terms with the mutant's attack. The dead man had not gone anywhere, but for some reason the virus had no effect on the young hero's body. It was as if time had rolled back, and now the hero once again had a chance to escape from this situation. He never had time to understand what exactly had happened, but he was definitely okay. This meant that the zombie was watching over Ray and would not let him die so quickly. Memories slowly surfaced in the hero's mind as he dodged the monster's blows. The boy had heard this female voice before, and now it sounded in his head again. Sidcroft wasn't entirely sure, but logically, he should have died the first time. However, a powerful zombie named Taya decided otherwise. And now Ray's life was continuing anew. The young man saw no other explanation for his situation, because only Taya could do this. If it weren't for her interference in his life, Sid Croft would have long ago become one of the zombies. The hero had no answer as to why the zombie helped him at all and moved back with him. But now Ray had immunity to the virus, since Taya protected him from infection. All this only played into Sid Croft's hands, since it increased the chances of revenge. All his life after the apocalypse, the hero fought zombies, considering them his enemies. But now one of the monsters was helping Ray, and he was no longer sure of his previous opinion. It was the people who ultimately betrayed Sid Croft, while the dead always remained honest. In order for his revenge to be accomplished, the hero was ready to lend his body to any powerful zombie. Taya seemed to hear Ray's mental scream, as his strength suddenly increased many times over. Now the mutant no longer had enough strength to withstand the attacks of an ordinary person. In a matter of seconds, Sid Croft dealt with an opponent who had previously been too much for him. This battle was difficult for the hero, but he learned a lot of new and useful information. Soon, the young man managed to deal with the remaining enemies who were preventing him from reaching the exit. The portal still glowed brightly, calling all lost human souls to enter it. Because this dimension was created too early, Sid Croft had doubts about its authenticity, but he walked through the portal just as he always did, as if the dimension was no different. At the end, there were even the usual rewards that were always given to those who managed to survive. Naturally, Ray expected to find crystals since they were the least common. To his delight, these were the very elements that were in the chest, and the hero could take the entire reward for himself. The crystals also varied in rarity, but right now that didn't matter to Sid Croft. Even this small detail was enough for him to develop his inventory, and he could think about the rest later. In the world of the apocalypse, the most important thing was how much you could upgrade your storage. That's why Ray's first move was to pour all his resources into his inventory to gain an advantage. Although he entered the portal in the evening, he returned to the real world only closer to night. The more Sid Croft learned about his situation, the more questions he had. The young man was left with several crystals containing a zombie virus. Curiosity demanded that the guy test this crystal on someone, and soon he found a suitable target for himself, who turned out to be a drunken social outcast. For several days, the man had been approaching passers-by in the hope that they would give him money, but no one usually paid attention to such people, so they soon died. Ray deliberately bumped into the outcast so that he would follow him into one of the dark alleys. The man was so drunk that he could hardly think straight, but he went after easy money. But this night turned out to be the last in the life of the drunkard, who would have died soon anyway. The next morning, journalists learned about the incident and surrounded the area. So for a long time, the laboratory workers could not get through to examine everything in detail. Dr. Kwadwo Rosberg and his young assistant were called to the crime scene, but none of them expected to see such a disfigured corpse, because the man had died recently. Many people looked at the corpse in bewilderment, as it raised too many questions. Only the young and inquisitive Sinti Eloka was brave enough to explore the man. But Sinti's research ended at the very beginning, because Kwadwo did not want to do it. Eloka was subordinate to the professor, so she could not object to him in such matters. But the assistant's intuition told her that she should examine the found body more closely. However, Rosberg considered himself more important than everyone else, so he never listened to other people's opinions. So Eloka was unable to convey to the leader the full importance of the research into this corpse. Her story could have ended in nothing if the hero had not noticed this girl in time. That corpse was the result of his night experiment, which had gone badly for the man. But now the young man knew for sure that before the apocalypse, the virus would not work on anyone. But in the end, the hero found something more important for himself, because he met that very Eloku. Only he knew that this girl would become the most brilliant scientist in the world of the apocalypse. Now she meant almost nothing, since she was still in the role of assistant. But after the world collapses, Sinti's opinion will very quickly be listened to. So Ray needed to get this girl on the team so that she would work only for him. That's why the guy didn't hide from his assistant, even though he could have escaped responsibility for the corpse. In fact, a few days ago, Sid Croft asked the bandits to prepare one room. Under Hazel's direction, this task was completed in the shortest possible time to please Ray. Until now, No one in the gang understood why the young schoolboy made such decisions. What surprised Ron most was that Sidcroft gradually brought other people into their team. It was for a Loki that the hero cleared out a huge laboratory that no one knew about yet. But Sidcroft knew that this place had belonged to Sinti in a past life. Next to such scary faces of the bandits, the girl would hardly want to say anything. Although Hazel would never hurt a woman, his reputation was badly damaged by the fights. So soon, Ray was left alone with Aloka to tell her part of the truth about the future. As the guy expected, the girl quickly became interested in information about the unknown crystal. But of course, the hero was not going to simply hand over such an important thing to the scientist. It took Sinti a moment to realize that this guy clearly had some ulterior motives. But for the sake of research, Elok was ready to do a lot, because Professor Rosberg did not respect her. For this reason, the girl's self-esteem was at rock bottom, even though she was capable of a lot. But as soon as she picked up the crystals, Sinti immediately began to doubt her abilities. In fact, she studied a lot and was talented, but no one paid attention to it. And only the hero knew the truth about how smart and inquisitive the young assistant was. He desperately wanted to accept her into his team because it would bring great benefits in the future. But for this, the hero needed Sinti to agree to silently work under his command. Experiments were the girl's whole life, so she could never give them up. So Ray got such a good assistant with almost no effort on his part. Eloki's curiosity was so great that she immediately began to research. Until now, such crystals could not be found anywhere, since only Sidcroft had portals open. Ray gradually revealed the truth about the living dead, as he was afraid of scaring his young assistant. He knew that in the future she would not be afraid of anything, but that was still to come. In the meantime, Sidcroft would like to see from Sinti those very amplifiers that could be made from crystals. In the past, Eloka was the best at understanding the structure, so no one could get around her. That's why it was so important for the hero to find this girl who was left alone in the apocalypse. Now, all that was left for Ray to do was guide Elok, who was exploring everything perfectly well without him. He created all the conditions for Sinti, so all he had to do was wait for the first good results. Until then, the hero had plenty of his own problems, as he still lacked a large number of resources. Although Sidcroft had managed to secure good support, his allies were of low status. To reach the top, Ray had to overcome many difficulties and deal with bandits, and the guy decided to start with Hans Reno, who owned almost all of the group's finances. This man, even in his youth, behaved like a real psycho, frightening many people around him. Hans was always so ruthless that no one dared to stand in his way, and this led to him quickly taking one of the leading positions in the world of cruelty and blood. Usually it was difficult to get into his domain, but soon he gathered everyone for his birthday. Many bandits attended this event with pleasure to appease Hans Reno, but most of them had no idea how Reno's gambling ended. The casino boss always treated those who lost big money with particular cruelty. Hans personally ensured that people repaid his debts on time, thereby increasing his finances. The debtors had no choice but to return the money by any means necessary. Otherwise, Reno had a short conversation with those who refused to obey him. Hans wasn't used to feeling sorry for people who didn't manage to stop losing bets in time. No matter how much the poor man begged for mercy, the leader remained just as adamant and merciless. Otherwise, the old man would not have reached such heights if he had thought not only about himself. That is why every loser paid cruelly with his body if he could not give up the money. Reno's guards had long been accustomed to the sight of blood, so this didn't evoke any pity in them either. The old man always achieved his goals, which is why he remained at the top of the gangster world for so long. Hans remembered well the rules according to which he could not trust anyone in this world. It was only because of this that many bandits still obeyed Reno, because they were afraid of him. But as soon as the hero appeared next to Hazel, he forgot what fear was. But Hans wasn't afraid of the guys, whom he didn't consider to be important people in the world of bandits. The old man was confident that he had nothing to fear, since he had gathered strong people around him. But today, Tom's had a specific goal, and it involved taking over the entire casino. At that moment, Reno had no idea that his guests had such large-scale plans. He himself had long wanted to overthrow Hazel in order to take all of his vast territories for himself. But now this was impossible, because behind Tom stood a hero who was not going to lose. Initially, Hazel didn't want to take only a few people to fight Reno, but Ray was confident of victory, since he was able to deal with all his opponents alone. Toms trusted his young boss and was the first to attack the selfish and rich old man. As he thought, the guard Isaac reacted so quickly that Hazel didn't have a chance. Even when Ray tried to attack the guard himself, it didn't produce any results. Isaac was so well trained that he dealt with such a weak attack without any problems. But the rest of the assistants barely had time to notice what exactly happened right under their noses. Sidcroft knew that Hans was about to give the order to attack, so he struck first. Thanks to the element of surprise, the hero quickly and easily dealt with some of the enemies. Of course, there were still too many guys in the office who were ready to fight. Harry bravely took on some of his opponents, as he had long dreamed of a worthy battle. Hills always forgot about pain and fatigue when it came to fighting for the advancement of his gang. For the first time in his life, Hazel had seen his former opponent give himself so much to a fight with someone. But Toms should have been more careful because Isaac did not stay on the sidelines during someone's fight. Ray only managed to save Hazel at the last moment, although he needed him alive for a long time. During the time that Toms and Sidcroft stood aside, Isaac had become fully prepared for the fight. He was the best among all of Hans's defenders, which is why he acted so self-confident. Many could barely keep up with his movements, but the hero first tested the man's skills. To win, Ray needed to understand how strong his opponent really was. So soon the young man intentionally missed one blow, which did not cause him any harm. After the recent battle with the zombies, all human movements seemed too slow to Ray. Although Isaac suspected something was wrong, Hans did not give him the opportunity to retreat from the battle. The man always obeyed his boss's orders without question, so he boldly rushed into battle. But he quickly realized that the schoolboy in front of him was not an ordinary person. No matter how desperately the guard resisted in the fight, it all brought him no results. It felt like Ray was a cat playing with a poor mouse in the form of a huge Isaac. So the result was obvious, because a mouse would never be able to defeat a cat in a fight. That's why the guard lost so quickly, as if he didn't know how to fight at all. Only Hans did not accept this outcome, because Isaac had always done his job well. But the arrival of just one person radically changed the balance of power between Hazel and Hans. Rano had already found himself in difficult situations more than once, so he was able to avoid panicking so quickly. But as soon as he saw that only a part of the guys came to help, the old man began to sweat from fear. He had been gathering a huge team around himself for so many years, but it couldn't come to his aid at the right moment. It turned out that most of Reno's group was somehow cut off from the casino building. Only now did Hans realize what a serious trap he had fallen into when he stood up to Hazel. But the old man had no intention of giving up, because he still had help, although not numerous. Meanwhile, inside the casino building, many people were playing games, enjoying the evening, but their hobbies were soon interrupted by Hans appearing on the floor right in front of the guests. The old man was no longer able to resist, as all his bandits had been defeated. Once again, Hazel was glad that Ray had been on his side from the start. Sidcroft was reluctant to take on the role of boss, but he did a good job of preparing the ground for Toms. This is how Hazel became the owner of not only his territory, but also the entire Reno casino. For the people around, not much changed, because the main thing was that they could continue playing, and only one person became interested in what was happening, as he was a very influential person. Hazel had heard so much about Roger that he preferred to cooperate with him rather than fight. But Ray had a different plan for this man, as he knew that Nucci would betray him again. The hero never explained anything to Toms, even though the man had many questions about this situation. But the lust for murder inside Ray was so strong that Hazel didn't ask him about anything. The young man had been preparing for the meeting with the traitor for so long, but it happened too soon for him. Minty, Lala, Rick, and Ermi continued to serve Roger, not perceiving anyone else. The guy gathered these people even before the zombie apocalypse, and trusted only them with his life. So it was in this composition that they reached the last level in the portal, after which they abandoned Ray. Of course, now Nucci had no idea how much rage Sidcroft felt towards him. At that moment, only in Roger did Hans see his final savior in this situation. It was in the boy's interests to help the old man, who still held a prominent position in the bandit community. But before Nucci could even blink, Ray instantly stunned Hans so much that he lost consciousness. Minty reacted instantly, but Roger did not want to start another fight now. The boy understood that this schoolboy was deliberately provoking him, but he didn't know the reasons for this. If there hadn't been so many prying eyes around, Roger wouldn't have left this case. But now it was more important for him to preserve his reputation, because he had tried so hard for it. So the young man retreated, but forever remembered Ray as his main rival in this life. Sidcroft was confident that they would meet again, because his revenge was not complete. Only Hazel's actions stopped the hero from harming the traitor right now. The guy's whole body was shaking with the desire for revenge, but he was not prepared enough for it. As soon as Ray came to his senses, he remembered that they now had a lot of money. Tom's planned to spend it all on expanding the group, but Sidcroft had a different plan. The young man needed almost all the gold in the world to become the strongest in the apocalypse. That's why he gave Hazel such a strange order, because he knew almost everything about the changes in the future. At the first levels, the inventory could be improved using crystals that dropped from zombies, but later levels required gold investment as inventory became more demanding. In the past, all gold disappeared from the world very quickly because people used it so actively. The hero would have remained lost in his thoughts for a long time if he had not felt the emergence of a portal. His intuition told him that a new dimension was very close, and he just needed to look for it. It turned out that the young man knew this location well, since he had rarely missed school before. Only something prevented the portal from opening at night, so it only flickered warningly. That's why Ray went to class the next morning, even though his goal was the portal. None of the people even suspected that they were close to such a phenomenal event. After Sidcroft disappeared from the school, only Noah constantly remembered him. The guy was afraid that that gang could cause serious harm to Ray, and everyone turned a blind eye to it. The saddest thing was that Noah continued to be insulted, desecrating the memory of Sidcroft. The bullies who had previously helped Ron and everything now felt even more unpunished. The boys were sure that Ray would never show up at school again because of his confrontation with Groom. But just a minute later, the hero appeared at the desk and instantly cleared his place of other people's textbooks. Few could tolerate such impudence, but everyone was afraid to attack the man who remained alive after the bandits. The school children no longer expected to see Sidcroft, but there was not a single trace of beating on him. Only Noah was glad to see Ray, because they had previously been called outcasts together. The hero had to take this step because the portal to another dimension never opened during the night. The young man couldn't allow anyone else to accidentally end up in a zombie world they weren't prepared for. Sidcroft's appearance at the school immediately attracted the interest of Millie Rose, who was the most famous girl. She often took advantage of her beauty and asked guys to buy expensive things for her. But the hero was no longer that weak and frightened boy who obeyed every word. No one expected that the guy would boldly refuse the most beautiful girl in school without even blinking an eye. Naturally, the bullies immediately stood up for Rose as they tried to get her attention every day. But Ray didn't care about all the words that tried to shame or humiliate him. For him, all these people were worth nothing, because many of them would die in the first days of the apocalypse. This time, Sidcroft did not have to deal with the enemies personally, as Ron came to his aid. Millie mistakenly thought that Groom had come to school just to see her, but the bandit was now under Ray's command, so he was only interested in a strong leader. Ron had been trying to contact Sidcroft for several days, but could only find him at school. What especially surprised everyone was that Groom stood up for Ray, whom he had only humiliated throughout his school life. But from now on, the boy always remembered how strong Sidcroft was, and did not want to contradict him. So he tried to bring the important news to the young leader as quickly as possible. The whole thing was that Aloka made some kind of discovery, but she couldn't get through to Ray herself. Although Ron didn't like being an errand boy, he liked and respected Cynthia. As soon as Ground left, the hero again plunged into anticipation, because he was looking for a portal to the dimension. He looked around eagerly so as not to miss that very immersion into the world of zombies. But everything around changed so quickly that the young man did not have time to understand anything. It seemed like Ray had just been sitting in class with the others, and now he had found himself in another dimension. Anyone else in his place would have panicked. But Sidcroft wanted to be here from the very beginning. This time, Ray tried to be more careful, as he almost died in the first test. Sidcroft tried to stick to his plan of action to find the portal first. Imagine his surprise when the rescue zone turned out to be right in the center of the yard. But the crowds of zombies that guarded it were so huge that the guy would hardly have made it through. Once again, in a moment of reflection, Ray relaxed, which was impossible to do in this dimension. So one of the zombies, who were always hungry, quickly attacked the tasty person, but the hero had enough reflexes to dodge the dead man's attack in time. As a result, The zombie flew down at full speed, as he had taken too much of a run-up to strike. As soon as his body hit the ground, the noise immediately attracted the rest of the crowd. The zombies didn't care who was making the noise, as they reacted to any unusual sound. If it weren't for this moment, the hero would hardly have guessed how to deal with such a huge crowd. But the answer came to him on its own, because the dead moved purely on instinct. But the television room was located in a completely different wing of the school building. But only in it could enough noise be created to distract all the zombies at once. So Ray had no choice but to try to get to that place. The guy was sure that on the way he would meet a lot of unpleasant dead people who would definitely attack. It was located in the farthest wing, so the hero had a long way to go to get to the right place. Sidcroft was lucky and did not forget the school building, although quite a few years had passed. But all this would not save the guy from the fact that the zombies suddenly began moving on the field again. As soon as they got rid of the source of the sound, the entire crowd of dead people returned back to the portal. This meant that the dead were guarding the portal. But the hero was not entirely sure of this. If this was true, it would make it even more difficult to reach the safety zone. One of the zombies just happened to be at Ray's fingertips, so he could test his theories on it. The dead didn't feel pain anyway, so the young man threw him out the window without mercy. As he expected, the crowd of zombies was only temporarily distracted by another source of noise. But soon they all returned to the portal, as if the place somehow lured them. The danger for the hero was not ordinary zombies, but those that possessed some kind of skills. Those who were good at something during life also became stronger or faster after death. And some of these exceptional dead people crowded around the portal, preventing the hero from passing peacefully. This time, Ray was even more serious, although it was difficult to complete such missions alone. A huge number of school corridors were practically without light and were fraught with danger. At any moment, a dangerous zombie could emerge from around the corner and attack the attentive hero. There were a lot of zombies walking around the school, because that was the essence of another dimension that was dangerous to people. But all of them had almost no intelligence and acted only on instincts that remained after death. Even in his past life, Ray learned to deal with zombies that had no skills, so it wasn't hard for him to come up with a plan to quickly deal with this dead man. The young man needed to quietly kill the enemy, just so as not to attract the attention of the others. The dead man didn't stand a chance against the smart and strong man he met on his way. So Sidcroft quickly dealt with the first zombie, but there were still many more on his way. While he had the opportunity, the boy tried to avoid encounters with monsters, because they were dangerous. His school, as luck would have it, was one of the largest, so the journey took a fair amount of time. Ray was constantly on edge to avoid being trapped by a crowd of zombies, and soon he found himself in a difficult situation, because a battle in a narrow corridor could not be avoided. There was less and less time left until the mission was completed, so the hero could not take a detour, so his only option was to fight. Even though it would create a lot of noise, Sidcroft hit with all his might, aiming to kill every zombie permanently with the first blow. He still had several corridors to go through, and there were more and more zombies with every turn. So the guy immediately sensed a catch when he soon did not notice any of the dead people on the way. He really should be more careful, because things like this never just happen. But Ray was in such a hurry that he stopped paying attention to the space around him. Only a lucky chance told the guy that a serious attack was being prepared against him. Sidcroft never thought that he would meet one of the powerful zombies right in the school corridors. The guy thought that all the elite dead had gathered on the field, but he was very wrong. As a result of this meeting, the noise attracted the attention of zombies that were just nearby. They did not miss the opportunity to find out what exactly dared to move within their radius of activity. Their intentions did not even need to be guessed, since hunger was written on the faces of the dead. It was not easy for the hero to dodge the greedy hands that were desperately trying to catch him. Eventually, he became exhausted, which was to be expected given the superior numbers. The zombies seemed to be just waiting for the moment when their victim would gradually begin to give in. And then came that very moment when Ray was once again close to dying. The dead man was determined to finish off the man with one powerful throw, because hunger was eating him up from the inside. Only good skills saved Sidcroft from the blow of the elite zombie that almost caught up with him. But it didn't end there, as the mutant wasn't ready to leave his victim so easily. The fact that the hero managed to disappear from his sight only made the hungry zombie even more angry. Once a mutant had chosen a target, nothing could stop him from pursuing it. In such a short time, Ray managed to prepare a good trap, which attracted the attention of the dead man. Only in a closed room was Sidcroft able to fight this zombie one-on-one. It was easy to follow the dead man's trail, because he would not have guessed that he was walking into a trap. At such moments, animal instincts only spoiled everything, since they could not help to sort things out. As soon as the zombie sensed the approach of prey, it immediately and indiscriminately attacked the area nearby. It was Iloka who suggested this bait option to the hero when she divided the zombie crystal. She kept asking the guy different questions as if she was trying to become an encyclopedia in the zombie world. But many of her studies were useful, because they could easily be applied in practice. So the dead man only got a test tube of blood, which attracted his attention. The mutant clearly didn't expect his target to be so cunning and agile this time. The zombie didn't care who he killed. But in the end, he was never able to reach Ray safely. Sidcroft was not going to waste the chance that the dead Taya had somehow given him again. His despair and desire to live gave him strength, which spread throughout his body like adrenaline. Before this, Ray was too self-confident, which is why he made such stupid mistakes. But now he has completely corrected his behavior, and this has led him to his first worthwhile victory. The hero's heart pounded loudly after the battle, as the adrenaline refused to leave his hot body. Sidcroft didn't just get the vials of blood for no reason, as he planned to continue avoiding battles. Experience fighting the mutant has shown that this bait works great on the stupid dead. But not everything was so simple, because the hero's body was constantly under enormous stress. Now Taya had settled herself in Sidcroft, and sometimes he felt her presence, which made him angry. But now Ray needed this zombie's help, so he had to put up with the pain. After his recent battle, many dead people had gathered in the corridor and heard the noise. But just one test tube brilliantly distracted them from their main goal, and the hero was able to quietly escape. The guy tried not to attract more attention, as the battles took up his time. That's why he examined every turn in detail. But in one of them, he didn't see a zombie. At that moment, the young man was in such a hurry that this did not alert him, although it should have. But Sidcroft was in the broadcast room within a couple of minutes, so he didn't care about the rest. More than anything in the world, the hero was afraid that the equipment would not work at that very moment. But he was lucky, and the equipment could be set up to distract all the zombies. Although Ray survived many years in the apocalypse, he still continued to make hurtful mistakes. He didn't lock the door, and his smell attracted especially sensitive zombies. The worst part was that the boy became the target of one of the mutants who moved quietly. Only intuition hinted to Sidcroft about the danger, but it was already too late to save himself. If only Ray had been more attentive and careful, he could have avoided this meeting. And in the end, in front of him was one of the most unpleasant mutants that could explode. Now the zombie virus was not scary for the hero, but the explosion would still attract many dead people. In the past, this type of mutant caused a lot of problems, as it constantly infected people with explosions. That's why it was not profitable for Ray to fight this monster now, because time was limited. Although the zombie moved slowly, once it chose a target, it pursued it for a long time. Once again, Sidcroft was lucky and easily lured the zombie to the huge window. Instead of fighting him, the young man chose to throw the mutant outside the school. The stupid zombie didn't have time to slow down after running, but wasn't even scared by the fall. But Ray couldn't let it explode loudly around him right now. The hero barely managed to hang the monster by the wire, and all that remained was to hope that it would withstand such weight. However, the sound inevitably attracted the attention of other zombies, who instantly appeared in the corridor. The young man had no time to deal with this crowd, as the portal's time was ending. He was just a little bit away from victory, but such difficulties arose at the final stage, so Ray paid no attention to the dead people anymore, desperately trying to start the broadcast, while the zombies slowly searched for him, as the blood bait no longer worked on them. And this time, Sidcroft did not close the door, as if constant dangers had taught him nothing. But he managed to turn on the loud broadcast before any of the zombies discovered it. Only this saved Ray from another battle, because the sound greatly irritated all the dead. Although most of them ran away, many zombies still remained in the school corridors. Sidcroft still had a few baits left, which he used generously on his enemies. If he had entered the battle, he would have definitely lost all the remaining time until the portal closed. So Ray used all his skill to avoid encounters with the dead. He only needed to go through a couple of corridors, and the exit to the field with the portal would be secured. But the hero's intuition told him that all this would not be as easy as he thought. And indeed, the huge crowd of zombies for some reason did not move towards the sound, as if they suspected something. But in this case, Sid Croft had prepared another diversionary tactic to ensure his safe escape. As soon as the body of the exploding zombie finally fell to the ground, the young man began to move. He only had a few seconds before the rest of the zombies were distracted by the mutant's fall. As he thought, the entire field was free, as the dead were well distracted by the television broadcast. This was the perfect chance to escape, because such an opportunity would never present itself again. But before the hero could reach the portal, the zombies destroyed the loud television broadcaster. The elite mutants did not put up with the sounds that constantly irritated them with their volume. And so Ray's entire brilliant plan was quickly destroyed by such unforeseen circumstances. The guy had no choice but to run to the portal before the rest of the dead. There were so many of them that an encounter with such a number would inevitably lead to his death. Everything was going well until the elite zombies suddenly sped up while running. It was not difficult for them to catch up with a man whose abilities were several times weaker than necessary. Once again, Sid Croft failed, although he tried his best to escape from the dimension. But reality was harsh and cruel, and zombies quickly surrounded the poor hero. In this situation, Ray had no chance of salvation, since he was now alone in another world. The dead did not loosen their grip, no matter how desperately the young man fought for his reborn life. But there were too many of them for him alone, and Sid Croft's strength was gradually running out. Even if he had good support, it is unlikely that the guy would have been able to cope with such a crowd. The most annoying thing was that there were only a few meters left to the portal, which was occupied by zombies. With his last strength, the hero reached for the saving exit. But all that was left for him was to die. All the guy's efforts were not enough to pass the test on his own. In reality, the weather seemed to mourn the hero's loss, as lightning flashed everywhere. But all this did not stop Eloku from continuing his beloved research. The girl could sit in the laboratory for several days in a row, but today something distracted her. She was ready to swear that she somehow saw a woman who was obviously dead. The thing is that before his death, the hero lost consciousness, while the zombies did not go anywhere. And Taya instantly appeared nearby, since her plans did not include Ray's quick death. In just a few minutes, she scattered all the zombies as if they were clumsy children. At that moment, the hero did not know whether he could trust this woman who had been dead for a long time. He decided it would be better not to approach the mutant, who could kill him with one finger. Taya didn't say a word to him, but her actions caused some kind of prehistoric horror inside. Until now, Ray has not understood the motives of this zombie, which for some reason helped him survive. Sid Croft had so many questions for Taya, but they all remained unanswered. Although the portal was now free, the woman did not allow Ray to escape from her. She behaved so wildly that even zombies wouldn't dare come closer just because of her aura. It was unclear how one creature could retain so much strength and incredible abilities. Now Taya was not going to explain anything to the hero, because he was at the very beginning of his journey. Meanwhile, in reality, Eloka was desperately trying to bring young Sid Croft to his senses. But the guy didn't immediately realize that he found himself in a laboratory, because Taya had brought him there. Under the influence of adrenaline, the young man attacked Cinti because he did not have time to understand the situation. But the girl didn't do anything bad to the guy. She even sincerely helped with the experiments. Ray's temporary madness had affected Eloka too early, but she still only cared about the test tubes. The assistant noticed that one of them was about to fall and barely managed to catch the precious material. For the first time in his life, the hero saw a girl who would not pay attention to the attack. Elok didn't care how she was treated, as long as she could do what she loved. When they both calmed down a little, the girl admitted that she had confused Ray with a woman. But this illusion was only created for a few moments, as Eloka soon recognized Sid Croft. She never understood the reason why there were so many nasty wounds on the guy's body. But the hero immediately guessed that it was Taya who brought him from the zombie dimension to the laboratory. His cuts from the zombie's hands remained, but Sid Croft was still alive and well. But what surprised the young man most was that Eloka had managed to conduct research on his body. While the boy was unconscious, the girl discovered traces of the same zombie virus in his body. She couldn't resist, and so she examined the contents of the blood of the sleeping Sid Croft. The viral elements in the hero's blood were the reason why he recovered so quickly. As a result, the regeneration completed its work, and now the young man was practically without injuries. It was no surprise that after all this, Loki had a huge number of questions. Ray knew he would lose the girl's trust if he refused to explain to her what was going on. But the truth was so hard to believe that Cinti would have found it hard to believe. Sidcroft told only part of his adventures, as the rest was easier to see. The assistant tried her best to react without skepticism, because the apocalypse seemed like something unbelievable. But soon the whole world will indeed undergo changes that will lead to many human deaths. Ray had managed to survive among zombies in the past, and he planned to repeat his exploits. As soon as the hero showed Elok the crystals he had obtained, she immediately forgot about the possible end of the world. The girl was only interested in research, in which she had already achieved impressive results. Not once did Sidcroft regret accepting the insecure Cinti into his team. Although the guy had doubts, he still told Elok that in the future she would be dead, but not at all because she will be bitten by zombies, but because the girl will make an experiment out of herself. If the girl found it difficult to believe in the apocalypse, she had no doubt about this outcome for herself. Ray didn't expect Cinti to immediately support him, just to continue his research. Meanwhile, the bandits, led by Ray, were collecting all the gold they could. This time, the guys came to the lab at the wrong moment, because Cinti was treating Sidcroft. Hazel reacted to this situation more quickly so as not to embarrass anyone even more. Only Ron's heart broke at that moment, as he felt sympathy for Iloka. Once Ray's treatment was fully completed, the entire group was able to talk about the results. Gradually, the hero told the truth to the rest of his assistants so that they would be prepared. And right now, the time has come to test the effect of the power drug. The hero remembered well how this remedy affected the human body, but the rest needed to get used to it. Hazel was the first to take this step. Although he had doubts about the contents of Cynthia's test tube, his whole body seemed to be immersed in fire. But in fact, nothing happened to the man. The first doses of the potions were the most difficult, since the body had not yet had time to adapt. But the hero believed that Toms could handle such a burden, because he had survived the apocalypse for a long time, and the man lived up to his expectations, as he soon fully recovered after taking the drug. At the same time, all of Hazel's indicators increased several times, which came as a surprise to him. So now Ray could prepare for the next step in his grand plan of revenge on his former friends. Time did not stand still, and the beginning of the apocalypse was gradually approaching the world. But Roger was unaware of this problem, as he was currently dissatisfied with Sidcroft's behavior. Rick tried his best to calm his heated boss, who could have done a lot of stupid things in the heat of the moment. But the guy didn't have all the latest information, so it was difficult for him to draw conclusions. But Ermi knew that Ray's assistants were actively buying up all the gold, regardless of its price. This caused great concern for the girl, since Nucci also had his own gold assets. Rick was always in favor of taking the observer's side in such unclear situations. It was his cool mind and calm that often helped the entire team survive in the past. But now his friend's opinion meant little to Roger, who was looking for quick results. No matter how many arguments Rick made, they were all useless for Nucci at that moment. The young man had already decided for himself that he would step over heads just to achieve the desired greatness. If earlier Roger was still willing to wait a little, now he needed results. And so he decided to radically stop all the actions of Ray, who was now actively interfering with his business. But Ermi couldn't find anything about the guy, who was an ordinary high school student. This is all because the hero was originally nothing special during his life. His parents died early, so he was used to achieving everything on his own. Therefore, the guy was prepared for the fact that he might be unexpectedly attacked by more bandits. Ray didn't immediately notice the pursuit, as he was too immersed in thoughts about the inventory. But as soon as the enemy got closer, his intuition told the guy that he should be more careful. The man Nucci sent was one of the notorious bandits under his command. His name was Jake, and he wasn't used to talking for long. So this time, he immediately rushed into the attack. But the guy's powerful blow ended unsuccessfully, since Sidcroft dodged it in time. For Ray, such bandits were soft targets that he didn't even want to waste his time on. Since Jake attacked first, the hero responded with double the force as punishment. For the first time in his life, the bandit was so scared that he could hardly say a word. He couldn't even imagine that an ordinary schoolboy would be so strong and fast. Of course, Sidcroft had no intention of harming the man, but he didn't mind giving him a scare. Ray was not stopped even by pleas for mercy, since no one was clearly going to feel sorry for him. He scared Jake so much that he didn't want to participate in attacking people anymore. But the hero didn't even have time to show half of what he was truly capable of. In fact, Sid Croft didn't just walk into that gateway because he felt another dimension. The portal had just opened, giving Ray the opportunity to face another zombie challenge. Although previous forays had been unsuccessful, the hero had no intention of stopping after defeats. Now he was under Ty's protection, so he was not afraid of death or injury. Until now, the young man has not reached the head of all the bandits to become strong enough. For now, he was only honing his physical skills so that he would never lose again in the future. Although that woman helped the hero, he could not rely solely on her abilities in battle. In the past, Sid Croft had become accustomed to the fact that his life always depended solely on his actions. Returning back, Ray began to gradually change the destinies of people who would be useful to him. The hero's ultimate goal was still revenge, but Roger's suffering was still far away. After that betrayal, Sid Croft wanted to inflict great pain on his friend and was willing to wait. Meanwhile, Cinti worked tirelessly to create new potions that would improve people's characteristics. Ron devoted all his time to the girl, which is why he even spent the night in the laboratory near her. It was on him that the assistant conducted experiments, since the guy himself was interested in becoming stronger. The more drugs Groom took, the less pain the next ones brought him. By the time the hero arrived at the laboratory, Ron had managed to drink several strength potions, so the bandits suddenly attacked Ray in the hope that he could deal with him quickly. But the guy's skills were still not enough, so his first blow missed its target. Even after a hard night in the zombie world, Sid Croft remained collected and alert in this world. Therefore, it was not difficult for him to put his friend on his shoulder blades, finally declaring victory. This entire attack was orchestrated so that Eloka would draw conclusions about the drug. The girl had hoped that Ron would do a much better job, but Ray was too strong for him. In any case, Cinti was pleased with the study, as the results progressed rapidly. During this time, she managed to become friends with Groom, so the girl's appearance underwent changes. But in her soul, Eloka was still the same inquisitive explorer who had achieved much. Ray brought Cinti crystals quite often, as their consumption was becoming more and more. But Sid Croft did not spare materials for potions, which were very useful in the battle with zombies. The guy placed a lot of emphasis on his friends, as they had achieved a lot in the past without him. But Ray didn't notice that Cinti was jealous because he spent so much time with Hazel. The girl had long noticed how interesting Sid Croft was, but she couldn't get close to him. But the hero had so much to do that he had no time to think about the feelings of his smart assistant. Today, the guy planned a large-scale attack on the gangster boss in order to take his place. But Hazel was not mentally prepared for such a confrontation, which was mortally dangerous. Ray couldn't wait any longer, because he needed the resources they could get after victory. Jared Broy was indeed a difficult foe, as he maintained a leadership position at that age. His assistants closely monitored changes in the world of bandits, so the old man was aware of everything. Now his attention was drawn to the rapid advance of Hazel, who had kept a low profile until now. He trampled on such people at the very beginning of their careers, destroying them like unnecessary weeds. So, on his birthday, Jared was fully prepared for surprises. Many people from the gangster world were invited to the event and tried not to be late. Only Hazel was so nervous because Ray had not yet shown up at the meeting place. As the representative of their group, it will be Tom's who will have to lead the people into the enemy's lair. But with Sid Croft away, Hazel was no longer so confident of defeating Broy. The bandits were becoming increasingly nervous, and time was ticking mercilessly, second by second. In the end, Harry, who had followed Sid Croft only because of his exceptional strength, was the first to give in. Hazel just needed someone to talk to take her mind off of Ray's absence. But Harry didn't even think about supporting the schoolboy, as he always looked only for his own benefit. Hills had a cunning plan, because he could give the Aloki potions to the bandit boss to appease him. So Tom still had to choose which side he would take in this difficult battle. Jared had built such a good defense around himself that he had assistants on every corner. For now, the hero watched from the sidelines attentively everything that was happening on enemy territory. He wasn't just lurking in the shadows for no reason. He wanted to know who Hazel would ultimately side with in this battle. Tom's felt a lot of pressure from all sides, because the important decision was his. Jared was prepared in advance for the emergence of rivals who would try to take away his high place. He didn't even think of feeling sorry for Toms, who had recently been moving up too quickly. Hazel knew perfectly well that he should not expect mercy from this man this time. Broy wasn't joking, because he felt that some inexperienced bandit was trying to take his place. He gathered such a large group of people that Toms would not be able to resist the leader. So Hazel's only solution was to negotiate to buy time a little. Jared was relaxed because the bandits were on his territory, which he controlled. Until now, Toms was unsure whether he should trust Ray or surrender to this man. The important thing in this situation was that Hazel had always been loyal to his friends. That's why he didn't grovel before Jared, even though he was stronger than him now. The man didn't even hope that his first attack would be successful, because Broy had security. This is one of the reasons why the old man behaved so self-confidently, because he trusted his subordinates. But he had no idea that Hazel had been making his way through this whole time, not only with the help of Sidcroft. The guy himself learned a lot to live up to the title of head of the bandit world. As soon as he gave the command, Harry, along with the rest of the people, attacked Jared's guards. But even in this situation, Broy remained calm, as if nothing unusual had happened. This is because Brandon was not easy to defeat, although he did not expect the first strong blow from Toms. But soon it was Hazel who found herself in a weak position. As the guards' movements were faster, Brandon had no mercy for anyone who tried to prevent his master from continuing to rule the territory. But it wasn't for nothing that Toms had spent so much time training with Ray, so he could put up a worthy fight against his opponent. The security guard clearly didn't expect his opponent to be anything more than a street gangster. He felt the power that Hazel possessed, although no one knew about it until now. Only his skills helped Brandon escape from a grip that almost became fatal. The man only now realized that he should have used a slightly different strategy with Toms. Jared wanted to deal with the opponents before the party started, and Brandon had to do his best. Even before coming here, Hazel drank a strength potion, which is why he moved a little differently. But he couldn't drag out the fight, because the effect would soon wear off. So the man desperately rushed into battle to defend Ray's ideas, even though he didn't show up. He even managed to land a few punches on Brandon before the guard could even begin to expect such speed. But the difference in their strength was obvious, since Jared's defender did not use any drugs. He still remained stronger than Hazel, no matter how much he tried to overdo it in the fight. The defeat was not easy for Toms, because he was responsible for each of his men. The man understood that even with a strength potion, he would not be able to defeat such trained fighters. His friends gradually lost ground as their opponents outnumbered him several times. Once again, doubts arose in Tom's mind about whether he had made the right choice a couple of minutes ago. There was a high chance that Jared would have spared the bandits if he had been given the potion. But suddenly he realized that he no longer wanted a life in which he had to bow his head to someone. No matter how difficult it was to achieve victory, Hazel did not intend to lose this fight. And at the very peak moment of the battle, Ray suddenly appeared on the battlefield, saving his subordinates. Brandon immediately felt the difference in his abilities, as he was unable to even move due to the grip. Never before had a security guard so easily received blows from which he was unable to defend himself. Sidcroft arrived just in time, as Toms was close to drinking another strength potion. Only now did Hazel realize that Ray had appeared at a suspiciously opportune moment. It was as if the guy had been watching his actions from the very beginning, testing his partner's fidelity. Pride spread through the bandit's body, as he was able to make the right choice this time too. With Sidcroft's arrival, Jared's defeat was only a matter of time, as the guy was stronger. Seeing the impudence of his opponents, Broy finally lost his temper, wanting to kill every enemy. But the guards were afraid to attack the man who stopped the strongest of them with one blow. For Sidcroft's allies, this was a huge moral boost, as they were already braced for defeat. But the balance of power suddenly changed, and the guards felt uncomfortable at that moment. Although Harry had previously thought about betrayal, now he had no doubt that their young leader would win. With such powerful protection, the bandits were no longer afraid to confront the most powerful man. Brandon tried until the very end to avoid a fight with a schoolboy whom he did not take seriously. The man was so confident of his victory that he put almost no effort into his blows. But Sidcroft quickly proved that he was to be taken seriously during battle. The more the hero dodged the blows, the angrier the experienced and strong guard became. At that moment, Brandon had no idea that he didn't stand a chance against Ray's abilities. But Hazel knew very well about the master's strength, and he resisted the guard without a potion. All the people around tried not to interfere in the fights, since they could not help in any way, while Jared's guards gradually gave up their positions under the powerful onslaught of the bandits. Sidcroft continued to dodge all the blows as if it cost him nothing at all. But if Brandon loses, then at best, Broy will simply fire him from work. The man's attacks became more and more desperate and vicious, but even this did not help him get closer to victory. Finally, the guard used his most powerful attack. But even that did not harm Ray in any way. For a hero, all of Brandon's movements were too slow and his blows too weak. That's why he finished the battle calmly and was practically not tired after the fight. No one present could believe their eyes, because Brandon was the strongest fighter. And now the best guard lay unconscious on the floor, although his opponent was safe and sound. Ray wasn't wrong when he said he would help Hazel reach the highest place in the bandit hierarchy. The guy behaved so coolly that no one else dared to attack him. Only an order from the boss forced the guards to attack the schoolboy who was fighting alone. But Sidcroft didn't need the team's help to deal with all the enemies himself. After meeting the elite zombies, any battle with people seemed easy to the guy. Ray didn't use even half the force against the guards, because he didn't want to kill anyone. But even this was enough to throw all the men left and right. For the first time in a long time, Jared experienced wild terror at the sight of such power and speed of the enemy. Only now did Broy realize that he would never be able to defeat this young schoolboy. Like all famous bandits, he always carried a pistol with him, which he was not afraid to use. But the hero quickly stopped this violation of the rules, because usually the battles were with other weapons. In this situation, the most offensive thing for the old man was to admit the fact that some kid had defeated him. He had no idea that the hero was actually many times older than he looked. As Ray had planned, the attack soon ended and he easily captured Broy's territory. Among the guests, no one would dare to contradict the man who had taken out every opponent single-handedly. Until the last moment, Hazel could not believe that Sidcroft would succeed in carrying out his plan. He was afraid that he might suddenly wake up and realize that it had all been just a good dream. But the reality was real. And now the leadership of the Broya territories was assigned to Tom's. Now Hazel no longer had the obstacles of the old men who had held their positions for so long. The man accepted the new role with pride, as he had initially been preparing for something greater. From now on, he trusted Ray completely, and was no longer going to question his strange decisions. An ordinary schoolboy promised to elevate a bandit, and in a short time, he kept his word. This is how the hero acquired not only a faithful assistant, but also a good friend. Their operation did not end there, as there were still many questions related to Roger's business. Nucci's assistants were desperately trying to meet the deadline set for them by the master. They always did everything on time, but now they had some unforeseen circumstances. The head of the workers tried to resolve the situation peacefully, but did not yet know that bandits had come to him. They were sent by Hazel at Ray's request, and these guys were so brazen that they would definitely attract attention. So Roger soon learned that one of his businesses was in big trouble. Employees quickly discovered a construction downtime due to third-party interference. All workers were restricted in their movements, as the bandits demanded some kind of payment. Nucci never imagined that he would suddenly encounter such difficulties with ordinary construction. Minty immediately guessed that it was not about money, because the bandits demanded a meeting with Roger. Pride did not allow the boy to ask his father for help, so he personally went to do this job. At that moment, Nucci had no idea that he would not be able to calmly deal with the current situation. As luck would have it, the weather had spoiled Roger's mood even more, so he was emotional. The guy believed that money could resolve any conflict, and he had a lot of it. Nucci's aristocratic upbringing prevented him from showing fear, even though he felt it. The bandits behaved as confidently as if they knew in advance about their victory in this conflict. Roger barely had time to hold back his assistants who wanted to speak out in his defense. At that moment, the young man did not yet know that Jared Broy was no longer leading the bandits. His place was literally taken by Hazel yesterday, and that's why the collaboration with Roger was canceled. This greatly frightened Nucci, who had previously been confident that he would be able to come to an agreement with the old man. But Ray stood in his way again, and Roger was unable to find any weaknesses in this guy. Deep down, Nucci still planned to pay off his debt with money so that they would leave him alone. But if everything were that simple, Then Toms wouldn't have to come personally to meet the guy. Roger did not expect to be asked to hand over the gold assets he had guarded so closely. He never imagined that Hazel would buy up almost all the gold left in the world. Naturally, the young man did not want to share, because he sensed some kind of catch in Tom's actions. But the new gangster boss didn't care about the wishes of his young competitor. Nucci had hoped in vain that he would be able to make a profitable deal with gold. Hazel didn't come to buy the assets, but to take them away from the guy. Roger didn't expect such impudence even from bandits. Although they rarely agreed to pay honestly, he fell into the clutches of Toms, behind whom stood Ray, who had no intention of forgiving his former friend. It was only for this reason that Nudie was having such a hard time now, because Sidcroft did not touch the others. Hazel played the role of the formidable leader brilliantly, which is what the hero expected from him from the very beginning. So it was no surprise that Roger eventually gave in to the anger that was eating him up inside. It was a stupid decision for him to start a fight, but the guy could no longer tolerate injustice. Minty was one of the first to rush at the boss, as he was too confident in his abilities. But Hazel didn't even think about defending himself, because his assistants had to save him. And Ray coped with this task perfectly, as it cost him nothing to deal with each opponent. The hero could barely restrain himself from killing his former friends right then and there, as he was consumed by rage. Toms did not remain aloof when he saw the emotions that overwhelmed his young master. He knew he had to deal with Roger as quickly as possible to avoid any problems. Since childhood, the man hated rich kids who earned money with their parents' money. While they were talking, Minty again tried to attack his unpleasant opponent. The guy was confident that such an unexpected move would definitely help him gain an advantage in the fight. But Sidcroft was prepared for any moves by his enemies, as he knew their fighting style well. So the hero once again emerged from this fight unharmed, even though Minty was strong. But he couldn't compare to Ray, who had survived rebirth and even retained some of his former powers. The result of their fierce struggle was the defeat of Minty, because no one could cope with Sidcroft. This came as a huge shock to Roger, who believed in his strongest friend. And now it turned out that the guy was left without support. Although there were still many enemies, Minty looked like he needed immediate medical attention and was unable to fight. Ray could barely contain his glee, because this was exactly the state these people had driven him into in the past. Sidcroft guessed that in Roger's mind there was a desire to escape, because that was what he did best. Nucci had no idea how this schoolboy knew so much useful information about him. He was willing to cooperate, but on the condition that Hazel handed Ray over to his control. The guy was going crazy from the realization that Sidcroft had so quickly become a very dangerous person for him. But he didn't take into account the fact that it was Ray who was the main one among all the bandits in this city. So Roger had no pleasure in store for him, as it was now his turn to receive a beating. A few hours later, the bandits left the crime scene, having finished their business. The hero felt a little better after he had taken some revenge on Nucci for betraying him. He mercilessly left the beaten boy in the rain, because he knew that he would find help. But even this was not enough for Ray, whose heart was burned with resentment and hatred because of death. He gradually built up his strength with the help of bandits, and had no intention of stopping there. None of the ordinary people knew that a simple schoolboy had practically taken over the city. Sidcroft acted so quickly only because the apocalypse was about to begin, and then his faithful assistants will come to his aid, because the guy raised them well. Although Ray had invested so much in the bandits, he didn't expect them to get used to him so quickly. From now on, Hazel wanted Sidcroft to personally manage all the gang's finances, but the boy knew that money would soon become useless. So he valued only gold. He managed to upgrade his inventory a little more, but it was still too little for the apocalypse. Now the storage facility was the size of a large suitcase, but it could reach gigantic proportions. This is exactly what the hero was striving for, trying to complete all his work before the apocalypse began. According to his calculations, he should soon reach the required strength to deal with the zombies. The young man had time alone to think, so he asked to be dropped off. Ray still hadn't explained anything to Hazel, but he didn't ask the gentleman any more questions. The man was used to the guy occasionally behaving strangely, so he nodded silently. It so happened that Sidcroft came out exactly in the place where Eloka was located. The assistant didn't tell anyone that she was going to meet with the professor to complete some business. Cindy's heart was pounding with excitement, but she wanted to take her research with her. That's why the girl secretly met with Rosberg in the hope that he would let her go quietly. The hero immediately suspected something was wrong, since he did not trust this greedy and selfish man. Meanwhile, in the hospital, a new plan was being hatched against the powerful Sid Croft. Roger took the defeat hard. Although he should have made a full physical recovery soon, his friends had just arrived in the room to discuss the next course of action. Minty had experienced firsthand how strong the schoolboy was, so he was in no hurry to fight him. None of the friends really knew what was the right thing to do in such a difficult situation. Roger had to make his own decision since he was the main one among them, so the allies silently waited to see what Nucci would come up with to save them this time too. The guy decided to just pretend to give in to raise pressure. But these were temporary measures. At the first opportunity, Roger will do everything to destroy the annoying schoolboy. Meanwhile, Eloka was desperately trying to get away from Quadjo so she could work for Ray in peace. But the assistant had no idea that the professor would turn out to be much more cunning and devious. In her eyes, she could always rely on this man who was higher in rank and wiser. But Rosberg wasn't going to let go of the girl whose research he wanted to appropriate so easily. Sinti attracted him not only with her intelligence, but also with her beauty. So the man wanted to keep her close. Their conversation could not end peacefully from the very beginning, since Quadjo was serious. What offended Elok most was that the man brazenly used her research for his own purposes. She couldn't even imagine that she would ever encounter such an impudent man in her life. Rosberg was a famous professor, so it was in his power to accuse Eloku of some mistake. As soon as Quadjo mentioned this, Sinti's angelic patience instantly burst at the seams. Then the professor couldn't contain himself because some girl publicly humiliated him. Ray made it just in time to prevent his assistant from suffering at the hands of the unpleasant man. Eloka didn't expect that even in such a situation, Sidcroft would suddenly come to her aid. At that moment, Quadjo had no idea that he would not be able to defeat this arrogant schoolboy. With Ray's arrival, Rosberg only had more motive to put pressure on his young assistant. The hero was always angered by people who used others to achieve their own goals. Because of the age difference, the professor felt he had won, and therefore demanded money for Sinti. The amount he named was not always available to adults, let alone children. People around treated this situation with sympathy, since the man put forward difficult conditions. The assistant still felt a sharp resentment, because Ray had to buy out her research. Quadjo was sure that after his words, Sidcroft would silently turn around and walk away in disgrace. But just a few minutes ago, Hazel gave the hero access to money, and the bandits had a lot of it. People in the cafe were waiting with interest for the outcome of this strange story that had caught their eye. Never in his life would Rosberg have thought that he would actually receive such a huge transfer on his card. From that moment on, his fear of Ray only intensified. Even though the boy was an ordinary schoolboy, none of the witnesses had ever parted with money so easily. So they were surprised. Since all the conditions were met, Sidcroft demanded a legal apology for Eloki. The professor's pride was deeply hurt, as he had lost such an incredible argument. But there were too many eyes around, so Quadjo had no other way out of the unpleasant situation. Sinti felt a huge sense of relief when her research data came back to her. At this point, they ended their showdown with Rosberg, as he fully admitted his defeat. But when they left the restaurant, the girl continued to be angry at Quadjo. But Ray didn't even think about giving in the money, since Hazel was already aware of the situation. Since the bandits will be dealing with the professor, the friends have time to relax together. They had never gone for a walk together before, and Sidcroft decided to make up for lost time. Who would have thought that in the very first store he would run into Mealy and her friend Rhea? The girls watched in surprise as their classmate walked with some beautiful lady. Ray was not shy about choosing expensive suits for himself, which Sinti wholeheartedly recommended to him. But Mealy and Raya didn't believe that their friend had money for all these clothes. Meanwhile, Quadjo was thinking about a plan for revenge, as he could not calm down after such a disgrace. Hazel found him just in time, as the professor had not yet managed to do anything bad. Now it was up to Tom's to return the money, and he was happy to fulfill such duties. As soon as the friends finished with the clothing store, Eloku became interested in cosmetics. The guy paid little attention to makeup, but all the girls took good care of themselves. By this time, Hazel had just finished with Quadjo and was no longer going to get involved with the bandits. Eloki's soul was finally free, because she didn't have to worry about lost finances. But Ray's adventures didn't end there, as his classmates decided to approach him. Sidcroft had no desire to interact with the girls who constantly bullied him at school, but Mealy had already decided that she would attract this guy's attention. So she tried to be nice to him. The girl had no idea that the hero knew about her nature, which is why he tried to completely ignore her. Rose was used to being respected by guys, so this alienation was hard for her. Until the very end, she believed that Ray was simply avoiding his feelings. But in fact, he was in love with her. But the hero was telling the truth from the very beginning, because he didn't want to get close to the impudent model. For the first time in her life, Mealy was faced with the fact that some guy dared to reject her beauty. This was a huge blow for the girl, because she always charmed everyone around her. She tried to take out her anger on Aloka, who was not to blame for anything. As revenge, Mealy was sure that it was Cinti who paid for all the purchases, which is why Ray stayed with her. An ordinary school child would never have earned such sums of money and could spend them so calmly. As a result of Millie's indignation, she attracted the attention of the employee who was supposed to calm the conflict. But Rose didn't plan on keeping quiet until Ray and his girlfriend left the store. From the outside, it really did seem that Sidcroft didn't have the money for such expensive cosmetics. So the best solution for the guy would be not to argue with the woman and leave the store. The employee was already saying goodbye to the customers, from whom she did not expect any large purchases. So she didn't expect Ray to suddenly buy up everything that was available in this store. As soon as Mealy and Rhea heard about this, they were so surprised that they couldn't utter a word. The hero wasn't joking when he made this decision, because the bandit money had to be enough. The woman had never dealt with such a large order before, so she was noticeably confused. But she had no right to refuse clients, no matter how strange their requests. Even Eloka thought that such a purchase was unnecessary. But Ray remembered that soon the money would not be needed. As usual, Mealy took everything personally, since it was she who provoked the guy to buy. Only now did Rhea realize that Sidcroft had money, so it was more profitable for them to be friends. Meanwhile, the employees were in complete shock, recounting their goods because there was too much of it. They had to hold back some of the cosmetics because they had already been reserved by customers. But the end result was still more like buying an expensive apartment somewhere in the center of the capital. None of Mealy's suitors had such means, although she often found rich men, while Ray calmly paid for everything, as if this amount was a small part of his budget. The guy didn't try to show off in front of the girls. He just tried to please Eloka with at least something. But his cunning classmates once again tried to lure him with their own beauty. As soon as Rose blinked her eyes sweetly and confessed her love, all her mistakes were forgiven. But even this had no effect on the hero, who felt nothing for the girl. Cinti was so happy with this purchase, because she couldn't afford something like this before. The assistant would have liked to continue shopping since they had time for it. In her excitement, she didn't immediately notice that Ray's face had changed dramatically as soon as they went outside, all because another portal appeared right in front of the guy, and he wanted to get there alone. Recently, the hero had developed his skills so much that another dimension did not cause him any problems. He was completely prepared for the apocalypse, as evidenced by the numerous zombie corpses. The boy became so immersed in the world of the dead that he constantly forgot to maintain contact with reality. And only Hazel reminded him that they still had a lot of things to do that Ray had started. But the assistants did their job so brilliantly that Sidcroft had no need to interfere. He tried to avoid being seen by other people while appearing in reality after the portal. However, some security guards did notice suspicious movement in the restricted areas. Although Toms had many questions about the chief's activities, he did not ask Ray about anything. So the hero had plenty of time to rest after completing a difficult test. But that night, everything didn't go according to plan, as the guy didn't even have time to return home. The number of zombie portals increased greatly as the end of the world was near. While Sidcroft disappeared into another dimension, Eloka continued to work diligently on the drugs. But the girl constantly thought about Ray, about whom, for some reason, there was no news for a long time. Only just before the apocalypse did the guy appear in the laboratory to gather all the assistants. Although they had not seen each other for a long time, neither Cinti nor Groom dared to ask their mysterious leader about anything. By this point, Hazel had completed all of Ray's assignments, so they were fully prepared. The boy's heart was pounding wildly because he had to tell the truth to his friends. It was not without reason that he asked Toms to gather all the resources in one place, because this would be their base. The time had finally come for Sidcroft to personally appreciate the efforts of the bandit leader, and the results exceeded all expectations. As Hazel worked day and night, he collected everything he needed from the list that Ray had personally compiled to create the base. Toms obediently emptied several magazines, although such orders seemed strange to him. Now it was the hero's turn to explain how exactly he was going to store all these supplies. For the past few weeks, the guy has been practically constantly in portals, constantly upgrading his inventory. So not only the storage, but also his skills have reached a high level, and no one can compare with him. Ray could only hope that his assistants would believe his incredible story. It wasn't by chance that he collected almost all the gold in the world, because only it could expand the inventory at high levels. In his past life, the hero did not have such an opportunity. But now he has radically changed his future. Before his friends' eyes, the gold slowly began to disappear as it was absorbed into Ray's vault. This had already surprised everyone around. But Sidcroft's surprises were still not over. Now he could come out and show everyone his inventory, since the time had come for it. The size of the Sidcroft storage facility was significantly larger than the hangar space in which the supplies were stored. If the guy started with a small bag, now he owns huge basketball courts. It was hard to believe what they saw, so the assistants decided it was some kind of trick. But Ray called for silence as his presentation of evidence continued. The chances that his friends will trust him will be higher if the hero demonstrates how the inventory works. So, right in front of their eyes, he moved some of the things into storage where they wouldn't get damaged. But the truth about the zombie apocalypse was still too hard for ordinary people. Sidcroft understood this, so he tried not to put pressure on his assistants, but to calmly explain everything to them. He had prepared gold in advance for their inventories, which would appear tonight. Hazel reacted more calmly to the news of the apocalypse than anyone else, although he was not prepared for it either. But Ron refused to believe until the very end that his future would change very soon. Sidcroft didn't have time to prove that he hadn't lied to his friends about how everything would change. So the guy could only hope that Tom's would stay on his side this time too. Despite the apocalypse happening tonight, Hazel did not abandon his duties. Ray could never understand what was going on in the head of the bandit he had elevated so high above the others. Finally, Tom's admitted that he trusted the chief, and would therefore be ready that night. As soon as the assistants left, Ray was left alone with Iloka again. And he did it for a reason. The hero understood that it would be difficult for the girl to survive in such a world, so he wanted to prepare her. It turned out that Cinti was angry at her friend only because he didn't show her the inventory right away. As a scientist, she hated to miss out on such interesting things, even if it was not the time. Part of Ray was still worried that Iloka might hide from him somewhere alone. But Sidcroft showed his assistant so many amazing things that she didn't even think of running away. The guy gave his girlfriend a few hours to fully prepare for the battle. And exactly at midnight, the whole world changed, as portals really did start appearing everywhere. Many people became victims in the first few minutes, since the hero could not save everyone. Therefore, he protected only those closest to him, although he understood the chaos that would plunge the entire world into. If people failed to pass the test in the portal, they became dead. The most terrible thing was that if they failed, some of the zombies would leave their dimension and enter the real world. Iloka was one of the first to receive the sad news that Ray's words were true. Only Sidcroft was fully prepared for the fact that the rules of life throughout the world would now change. Now the assistant also had a storage facility, although it was located on the very first level. So Ray immediately helped Cindy increase her inventory to make it easier for the girl to survive the apocalypse. He had so many resources that he could freely spend them on helping his friends. But Sidcroft's work was not over yet, as he still had to hunt for the remaining crystals. So the boy set out boldly, since he was still too strong to die. In this situation, he was only worried about Iloku, who still had a lot to learn. Therefore, to begin with, the hero chose a less complex portal to show the girl its structure. This place was radically different from the real world, as its own laws operated there. Sidcroft tried to be careful because zombies could appear at any moment. Iloka had never encountered the dead before, so she didn't understand how serious the situation was. Since the entrance to the portals was now free, they soon met another group of people. The new acquaintances had no idea what had happened since they knew nothing about the apocalypse, so they were wary of Ray and Cinti, whom they were seeing for the first time in their lives. As usual, the hero was unlucky. And even this time, he accidentally ran into his friends. They were high school bullies who had constantly bullied a classmate in the past. The first to introduce themselves were Tyler Chaucer and Kana Lately, who were the coach and the sports student. Then Russell and Thomas gave their names. And the last one to give his name was the driver, Bronze. That's how Ray realized that he would have to be responsible for these people too, if they turned out to be good. While they were talking, the zombies gradually approached the only group of people in the portal. Sidcroft was the first to notice their approach, as his intuition had recently become well developed. These undead were weak pawns in the zombie hierarchy, but they still posed a threat. Many people were not prepared to fight them, so they could die quickly soon. Mr. Bronze didn't even have time to react to the attack, which happened so quickly. It was only thanks to Tyler's help that he survived, as the coach died fighting well. As a result, the dead man flew back several meters, since Chowser had plenty of strength. The coach had not yet realized that he had not killed the man at all, since he was already dead. However, all these blows were not enough to finally deal with the zombies. No matter how many times their bones were broken, they continued to move as long as their heads were intact. So in this fight, the advantages were on the side of the dead man, because Tyler did not know his weaknesses. Although the hero planned to keep a low profile, he still came to the aid of his new acquaintance this time. The guy made it clear that only weapons and headshots could kill zombies. The dead man really did not move anymore after his mind stopped functioning. Sidcroft had no fear of the dead, having fought them for several years, but the rest gave in to panic, as they could not find any weapons to fight. Tyler felt weak without the advantage of a knife, as Sidcroft had. Mr. Bronze was sure that somewhere on the bus there must be tools to fix it. Now he only trusted Ray, since the hero was in a better position because of the weapon. Chaucer was eager to change the status quo and take charge. Russell had no intention of joining Sidcroft, so he decided to help the strong coach out a little. While the hero was talking to Mr. Bronze, his classmate was gaining Tyler's trust. As a result, Chaucer only became more hostile to Ray, who was threatening his authority. The coach was always used to being in charge, so he tried to make decisions before everyone else. Although Russell sided with Tyler, Thomas remained dissatisfied with the state of their affairs. The guy still hadn't fully decided who he should trust his life to now. Circumstances were such that, in addition to repairs, the bus also needed gasoline. The hooligans immediately announced that they would remain near the bus to try to fix it. In that case, Ray and Elok had to go to the gas station, even though they didn't agree to it. Kana volunteered to go with the guys, since she knew the way to the gas station well. This division pleased the coach, who just wanted to hide in the bus. No one knew that the hero was not actually afraid to walk several kilometers in the zombie world. Leatley tried to act friendly so as not to be suspected of only helping the coach. But Ray didn't care about the misunderstandings between people, since he was only interested in zombies. The guy was the first to hear the approach of the dead, who were just very hungry. The zombies quickly surrounded the three people who were trying to get through their territory to get to the gasoline. Although Kana went with Ray and Aloka, she didn't expect to be given a weapon right away. Sidcroft now had to fight a horde of zombies, so he provided the girls with protection. The hero had plenty of knives in his inventory, so he didn't have to worry about losses. He knew the weak points of the dead well, so he reminded the two girls of them. Ray was the first to demonstrate how to attack zombies without them biting. To Sidcroft, all the enemy's movements were simple, but Eloka and Kana could hardly follow them. The guy sometimes forgot that the difference in skills between him and other people was great. So what was a simple task for him seemed like something incredible to the girls. They still had to get used to the fact that killing zombies was not the same as killing people. Although Kana and Eloka were ready to fight for their lives, stabbing someone with a knife was not easy. The hero used this zombie attack as training so that the girl would be easier in battle later. Cinti was the first to confidently repel the attack of the dead, but her strength was not enough. So, in just a moment, the girl found herself in serious danger, because she could not win. Never in her life had Elok been so scared, because she could not protect herself from the monsters. Sidcroft was in no hurry to save his assistant, as she had to learn to fight on her own. In a critical situation, the girl's brain began to function more actively, and she remembered the zombies' weaknesses. Although Cinti was in a difficult situation, she was able to find a way out of it. As a result, this dead man lost, although he had every chance to bite the weak girl. If Eloka had moved even a little slower, she would never have achieved the desired result. Although with great difficulty, the assistant achieved her first victory, just as Ray had taught her. But this battle took so much strength from her that Cinti was not ready to fight further. But it turned out that the girl's help was no longer needed, since Sidcroft had sorted everything out. The guy moved so fast that not a single zombie had time to even get close to him. Ray's years of training had paid off, as his skills now allowed him to win in every situation. The hardest thing for Kane was to believe that this schoolboy had dealt with all the enemies so quickly. In the eyes of the girls, the hero looked like a real god of war, since no one could defeat him. If it weren't for years of training on the battlefield, Ray wouldn't have been able to achieve such results. But the young man still did not relax, since he needed to provide protection for the girls. Iloka quickly realized that in the past, a person's position was determined by their strength, but she didn't expect that Ray was the strongest, which is why he continued to develop easily even now. The hero knew from the very beginning that there was no safe place anywhere within this dimension. So the coach was very wrong when he thought that the zombies wouldn't get him near the bus. 3 boys had to protect Mr. Bronze, as he was the only one who knew how to drive the bus. But the zombies gradually became more numerous, and the boys were unable to repel their attacks. Only now did Russell realize that he had chosen the wrong side in order to stay alive. Thomas had nothing to say to his friend, since it was because of him that they found themselves in this situation. Tyler proved to be a poor leader because he couldn't come up with anything to protect himself. Therefore, Russell had to desperately fight for his life. But the boys' strength was gradually waning. Chaucer himself understood the bad situation they were in, but he did not admit his guilt. As a result, the trainer could not come up with anything better than a human bait that would distract the zombies. Thomas tried his best to save his friend, but what could he do against a strong man? The guy was most afraid that he would go to the dead next, so he had to keep quiet. Russell believed until the very end that Chaucer would not treat him so cruelly, because they were both human. But the coach was only good on the outside. But on the inside, he was ready to sacrifice another person. So the schoolboy's life was soon to be cut short as he was thrown out of the protective zone. As the trainer suspected, the zombies immediately took the bait because they were hungry. Russell fell into the very center of the dead, whose gazes immediately turned to him. Their entire huge crowd headed towards the poor schoolboy, who could not save himself in any way. Even Bronze didn't dare to object to the coach, although he was sure that the man would not kill him. For Tyler, only his life mattered, so he wasn't sad about throwing Russell out. Meanwhile, Kana still held the knife in her hands, which she could point at more than just zombies. The girl had an assignment from her coach, but now she doubted whether it was worth carrying out. Ray seemed more and more like a good person to her, whose opinion was worth listening to. So lately was increasingly doubtful about whether she should have trusted her sports supervisor. Soon they reached a gas station, where there was also a huge crowd of dead people. The only thing that bothered the hero in this situation was that for some reason, a special task had not yet appeared. But for now, he followed the agreed-upon plan, since they still had to leave by bus. Mr. Bronze had just managed to fix the car, so all that was left was to wait for gas. This news made Chaucer very happy, although he couldn't imagine how the second group would get through the zombies. Thomas watched with alarm as the monsters gradually made their way back to the bus. Russell inevitably became one of the dead because he couldn't run away from them for too long. With horror, his friend realized that it was now his turn to distract the dead from the bus. He would have preferred to throw the old man out, since he had far less chance of survival anyway. But Mr. Bronze was the only one who knew how to drive a bus, so Tyler needed him. That's why Thomas had to be the victim, because Chaucer was too cruel. The man didn't care what some young man thought about him because he couldn't be of any use to him. Tyler wasn't afraid of being known as a killer, since no one would be able to prove anything anyway. As a result, the schoolboy had no choice but to run away from the crowd of zombies. Tyler and Bronze watched in silence as the boy they had sent to his death. At some point, the old man began to doubt whether they had done the right thing with the schoolboy. But the coach was not going to admit his guilt, because it was easier to blame other people. They both knew that Thomas wouldn't last very long, so other measures would have to be taken. Neither Tyler nor Mr. Bronze even tried to save the student, so as not to die themselves. Soon the moment came when the young man was completely exhausted and could no longer help himself. The hungry zombies almost caught up with the guy who looked so tasty and alive. Only a miracle could have saved Thomas from death. And that is exactly what happened to him at this dangerous moment. It so happened that the hero and the girls had just returned to the bus, and so he helped the guy. Thomas immediately latched onto this ray of hope in the form of Ray, whom he had previously bullied. His best friend became a zombie, and just a little bit more and the schoolboy would have joined this crowd. Inside Thomas, everything burned with incredible anger towards Tyler, who was ready to kill all people for himself. But Chaucer didn't feel guilty, and even lied that the boys themselves decided to sacrifice themselves. These words were so far from the truth that Thomas almost attacked the coach in response. At first, Kana didn't even believe that her teacher could really act so cruelly, but she didn't know half of Tyler's true character. That he was a cruel and terrible person. Sidcroft had suspected from the start that the coach was not to be trusted, as he looked like a coward. For Leetley, the coach's behavior made it clear that she could no longer rely on his opinion. The man was only concerned with his own salvation, so he didn't pay attention to the deaths of people. Tyler originally sent Kana to retrieve the weapon Ray possessed, and she has now achieved that goal. If Sidcroft guessed about this, then Eloka did not even suspect that the trainer had such a plan. Kana always and in everything obeyed Tyler, who made a good athlete out of her. But after Ray's heroism, which she saw with her own eyes, the girl no longer trusted Chaucer. The man clearly did not expect that his faithful student would betray him and notice his weak character in time. Lately tried to appeal to the coach's conscience that he had done a lot of bad things during her absence, but Tyler only promised to destroy anyone who stood in the way of his salvation. Once Chaucer showed such a thirst for murder, Ray was given the task of eliminating him. Now a terrible aura emanated from Sidcroft, and Tyler and Mr. Bronze could not ignore it. Even though the guy was surrounded by zombies, he looked like he didn't care one bit. As soon as the dead attacked the hero, he immediately responded to all their attacks with redoubled force. Even Tyler's trained muscles weren't ready to replicate such an amazing result. In a few minutes, Ray dealt with the entire crowd of zombies that had surrounded the bus for a long time. Sidcroft himself wanted to carry out the task of eliminating the coach, because he had done a lot of bad things. Cowards always have a good premonition of their death, so the man's whole body shook in fear. At the last moment, he managed to shield himself with an old man who could not be killed. Tyler hoped that this would stop Ray, but the hero did not even think about worrying about the mister's small wound. Bronze believed until the very end that the coach would not touch him, but it turned out that Tyler was much more selfish. As a result, they both suffered injuries. Although Sidcroft was only targeting the insolent trainer, Chaucer made a grave mistake when he thought that the old man's body would protect him from the wrath of a young schoolboy. Ray always hated traitors, and now the portal allowed him to deal with one of them. So the guy felt no pity for a man who would kill any number of people for himself. In the last seconds of his life, the coach resorted to pleading, just to be left alone. But Ray knew perfectly well that Tyler would hit him at the first opportunity, as soon as he turned his back to him. Even now, the man was trying his best to escape, to hide behind the bodies of his former comrades. But the hero did not allow the coach to offend the people who were now under his powerful protection. No matter how much Chaucer continued to beg for mercy, no one believed his words anymore. After his rebirth, the hero swore to himself that he would destroy all traitors without regret. Although the spectacle was sad, everyone around supported Sidcroft's decision. Sometimes it was better to sacrifice one bad person to save many good ones. That's why Ray personally dealt with Tyler so that he couldn't hurt anyone else. Immediately after this, the guy barely managed to save Kana, who did not notice the approaching dead. All the survivors had to refuel the bus as quickly as possible in order to leave the dimension. Mr. Bronze was terrified of what would happen if the bus still didn't start after the repairs. The old man did all he could, and his knowledge of cars would not have been enough for another repair. It was impossible to even think about trying to escape from the huge crowd of zombies that was gradually gathering. But the people were lucky, because the bus finally deigned to start and slowly set off. It was a huge victory, because now they could all finally return to reality. The old man made sure once again that everyone was there before heading off down the road. Bronze didn't know the exact route, but any movement was better than staying in place. But they were driving so slowly that the zombies would soon catch up with the bus. But Bronze couldn't push it any further because the engine was badly damaged. What Kana feared most was that all their efforts would be in vain and the zombies would get to them. Thomas was still tormented by guilt over his dead friend, and he did not want to follow him into the hands of the zombies. Only Ray came up with a brilliant solution, because they could use Tyler's body as bait. The former hooligan did not hesitate for long about this decision, as the coach had caused him a lot of pain, and so his body could serve for good, since the man would hold back the dead for some time. As a result, it worked so well that the zombies didn't even notice the difference between a living person and a corpse. That's how the entire bus got rid of their pursuers in order to find the portal as quickly and easily as possible. Sidcroft did not expect any thanks for the help he gave to all the survivors, but Eloka still expressed all her thoughts to the guy, asking him for forgiveness for her doubts. Only today did it become clear to her that people could be terrible creatures by nature. The hero was glad that his assistant had drawn such an important conclusion for herself from one trip. But he would like the girl not to trust even those close to her, because in the apocalypse, everyone is for himself. But they were distracted from this conversation by Mr. Bronze, who noticed something unusual ahead. Only Sidcroft had seen portals before, so he was the only one who wasn't surprised when they reached him. The guy was ready to be the first to go inside to prove that only these gates could save them. He understood that no one would trust such strange things after what they saw, but only this portal could save people from becoming zombies at the end of time. When you enter the portal, you leave the dimension with zombies, and they no longer pursue you. Inside the space, there were rewards for every person who initially entered the dimension. So the survivors had to divide among themselves the resources that were intended for the dead. In the past, people often killed each other in order to take more profit for themselves. But now this did not affect the rest, since Ray was only glad if they survived. Only Thomas doubted that Sidcroft could be trusted, as he feared his revenge. But the old man and the schoolboy had no choice when Kana also entered the portal after Ray. The girl was confident that she was safe next to the guy who fought so brilliantly. Sidcroft was indeed pleased that Kana had listened to his advice and not become stubborn. After the girl's example, Thomas and Bronze nevertheless joined the others. Although they were afraid, the hero briefly explained how to properly use the storage to upgrade it. Only after that did they all return to the real world, where there were not yet so many zombies. After what happened, Kana would like to stick close to Sidcroft, who seemed reliable to her. But the young man didn't have time to answer the girl, because his phone suddenly rang. The whole thing was that Millie Rose suddenly decided to contact him, although she had previously ignored Ray. But the young man's primary concern was the restoration of Eloki, so he did not respond. After completing the test, they returned to the lab where Cinti felt better. Sidcroft had already gotten used to the fact that in reality, a few minutes could pass, but in the portal, many days. Ray personally had no intention of stopping there, as he wanted to visit another portal. It was no surprise that the assistant was worried about her friend, but Sidcroft didn't need support. The hero did not notice that the girl would like to go with him, but was too tired for this matter. Elok herself was sad because she didn't have enough strength to help Ray to a greater extent. The hero was pleased that his assistant did not follow him, but decided to explore the potions further. He was afraid that Cinti might have become a victim of the test, because this time he had to attack a person. Until now, the young man had been receiving calls from Mealy, but had not even thought of answering the girl. He was irritated by Rose's clinginess, who wanted to use the hero once again. The girl actually tried to reach out to Sidcroft just to get help. Together with Raya, they were terrified that zombies might accidentally overtake them soon. That's why Mealy was so persistent, because Ray proved to her that he had a lot of resources. Even the fact that she hid in her dear house did not bring relief to the beauty. More and more people were losing in the portal, causing zombies to gradually appear in reality. Sidcroft was prepared for this apocalypse, so he was the only one who didn't panic. The guy entered into battle only when necessary, so as not to waste his energy unnecessarily. Although he dealt with the zombies quickly, he didn't want to accidentally get hurt in the battle. Meanwhile, the building the girls were in was suddenly put to the test. It took Mealy and Raya a moment to notice that everything around them had changed, and they were no longer safe. Danger zones could be created anywhere, and each time it happened completely randomly. All the residents who had been transported to another dimension quickly gathered on the first floor. Mealy felt uncomfortable being here in just her nightgown, but she didn't even have time to change. It was not surprising that men cast hungry glances at the girl, who was very beautiful. Her friend defended Rose with all her might, but it still wasn't enough for her. In such chaos, it was Mr. Samuel who stepped up, as he was accustomed to leadership roles. In this house, many people knew this man, who often came to the aid of all the residents. So many quickly agreed to give Samuel the final say, just to avoid having to make decisions. Only two friends were unsure whether this man could be trusted with their lives. It took the residents a moment to notice that there was another person among them, someone they had not seen before. The whole point was that the hero entered the building exactly at the moment when the test began. Although Mealy recognized the guy, she did not show her relief, because he did not answer her calls. Sidcroft acted cunningly, as he lied that he came to meet Rose, although he was simply pursuing the portal. But for the girl, these words were very important, as she wanted to get closer to her classmate. However, Mealy would not have attracted men so much if she had immediately thrown herself into their arms. While everyone continued to do nothing, one of the guys remembered that he had to leave, but the young man was unable to take a single step outside the territory, as the cold winds stunned him. No one could understand why such a terrible snowfall suddenly began in the summer. Mr. was the first to realize that they shouldn't go outside, because it would mean death. That guy almost passed out from the cold, even though he only looked outside for a few seconds. Ray was dissatisfied with such actions, because the young man had just accidentally started the test. None of the residents were prepared for the fact that they would soon encounter zombies. Sidcroft quickly realized that he couldn't even try to go outside until the test was over. This house became a small fortress, and all actions now had to take place inside it. All tests were divided into two types, one of which was designed to explore the territory, and the second one forced people to defend the place where they appeared from huge crowds of zombies. Since this time the test was of the second type, the zombies in it should be somewhat simpler, but Ray was in no hurry to tell people about all this. That from the very beginning they treated him with hostility. In this situation, Sumuel calmly took the lead, as everyone else was afraid to speak. Many residents realized that most people had managed to evacuate, and they were luckier. Those who remained had to somehow survive without electricity and water. The biggest pressure on people was the realization of loneliness, since it was unlikely that anyone would be able to come to their aid. While the girls were worried about the severe cold, as they were dressed too lightly for it, Mr. saw that panic was gradually taking over the minds of people who were not accustomed to difficulties. He was the only one who wasn't afraid to act sternly, just to bring everyone to their senses. And the first thing Samuel did was ask the residents to bring any resources they could find from their apartment. In such a dark house, people were afraid to move between floors, but there was no other choice. Only the hero found himself in a losing situation, since he did not live in this place to begin with. Mr. didn't care much about the unfamiliar schoolboy who happened to be with them, but Ray refused to act together because without resources he was in a bad position. Their argument could have lasted even longer if the boys hadn't found several radios for communication. So the gentleman hurried to distribute this useful thing to everyone so that they could understand what was going on. One of the radios even went to Sidcroft, although he had not planned to communicate with anyone present. In fact, the Mr. was only playing the role of a good leader, and the hero clearly sensed the trick in him. But the guy was in no hurry to share his observations with anyone, so as not to cause panic among people. Now only Mealy was sincerely worried about him, although her attitude towards Ray was also questionable. The girl could not understand why the young man refused to cooperate with the others, but Sidcroft merely changed the subject of the conversation, as he was not used to sharing his thoughts with anyone. Since Rose began to feel very cold, she did not have time for long conversations with her friend. Ray noticed the girl's body trembling, so he hurried to escort her to the room where she could get dressed. So far, they have not encountered any of the dead in the dark corridors of the huge building, but the frozen people barely had enough strength to move around the room. Sidcroft tried to be more polite to Millie and Rhea, considering the situation they were in. Under his watchful eye, the girls soon reached their room, which they were glad about. But the hero was confused by the fact that there had still been no word on the radio about the appearance of even one zombie. While the girls left him alone in the corridor, Sidcroft decided to look around a little. His attention was drawn to the very first apartment that was located next to Millie's place. The girls had no idea that their friend would not stand still while they were coming to their senses. The very first door calmly gave way to the hero, as if it had been waiting for him to finally open it. Sidcroft realized there was a zombie in the room even before it attacked him. Due to the confined space, the hero was unable to dodge in time, but at least he reduced the pain from the blow. In this situation, the only thing he was worried about was whether there was some kind of zombie in Rose's room too. At that moment, the girl looked out at the noise and discovered that her friend was being attacked by a dead man. Fear consumed Mealy so much that she was unable to take any action. Only after a few seconds did she realize to close the doors so that the zombie wouldn't notice her. But the horror never left the young girl, who for the first time in her life encountered such horror. Both friends were too physically weak to engage in battle with the zombies, so they could only hope that Ray would be able to survive this terrible fight. The first thing the girls did was contact Samuel, since he was now making all the decisions. The man immediately guessed that Sidcroft had been attacked by one of the monsters shown on the news. But now he was only concerned about resources, and his friends found warm clothes and some food in the apartment. Just for this reason, the gentleman was ready to go upstairs, But for now, he asked the girls to get ready. Raya and Mealy calmed down a little from the knowledge that the leader would soon take them away. They waited in horror inside the apartment until the man finally knocked on the door. It turned out that Samuel hadn't encountered any obstacles on his way here, so he was fine. The trio decided that Sidcroft had died at the hands of a zombie, who was now wandering somewhere around the building. If only they had looked into the room from which the bloody trail extended, they would have learned the truth. Because this blood did not belong to Ray, but to the very same dead man that the girls saw. The hero learned via radio that all the residents now considered him dead, and this was only to his advantage. The guy boldly opened one door after another, destroying all the zombies that he met along the way. According to the task, he needed to find some treasure, so he had to explore the entire house. Since all the people had gathered on the first floor, Ray began his search from the very last one. He didn't encounter zombies in every room, but Sidcroft still remained cautious. Meanwhile, the residents crowded cautiously at the very bottom, not understanding what was happening. They collected only a small amount of supplies, which would not have lasted for several days. But Samuel still praised each person to raise the morale of the entire team. During this time, the man managed to sort out his inventory, but had not yet come up with a plan of action. So the hero still had a lot of time to explore, because he still didn't find the treasure. The guy moved at a good speed and soon cleared several upper floors. He had to visit the residents' rooms, and in one of them he immediately smelled blood. But at that moment, residents had no time to search for resources behind closed doors in the same way. They all struggled to contain the fear that permeated them even more than the bitter cold. Those who had lived in the house for a long time believed that Samuel could be relied upon because he protected his girlfriend. But none of them knew that Ira was already dead, and it was Mr. who did this to her. Ray didn't expect that in the building, besides the zombies, there would be a real killer who would become the leader. He understood that the people below were in great danger, but no one would believe him. At this point, one of the guys suddenly announced that he no longer wanted to be part of the team. Red was used to always acting alone, since he trusted only his own skills. The leader did not like this split, but he kept his angry emotions to himself. The young man was clearly serious, and it was not to Samuel's advantage to try to dissuade him. This example could become contagious, so Mr. tried to think of a way to unite the others. In the real world, things were no better, as zombies continued to break through the portals. Many people did not have the fighting power, so they died and joined the hordes of the dead. And only Captain Stephen Doveby continued to hold his position, although people were dying one after another. But now the hero had no time to think about reality, because there were many problems in this dimension. After what he saw, he made Samuel his enemy, since such people could not be released. But the residents trusted the Mister, in whose eyes he had not yet done anything bad. They nevertheless decided to explore the premises. Although they tried not to open new rooms, the leader carefully monitored those who might violate the order, because there could be zombies in the apartments. The residents had never met the dead in person, so they couldn't be scared enough. Only the gentleman understood that, in the event of an attack, they would hardly be able to put up a decent resistance. That's why he tried to protect people from making mistakes, even though they hardly collected resources because of it. But the Mister's authority was so great that the men did not even try to argue with him. In this situation, Samuel was in great demand, as someone was constantly calling him on the radio. So the leader could not keep track of all the people, and he could only hope for their prudence. But the lack of resources pushed the residents to stupid actions, although they tried to hold on. It turned out that some people were going crazy from hunger, because there wasn't enough food for everyone. Millie always tried to watch her figure, so she couldn't allow herself to go hungry. But the other girls opposed Rose, as everyone was now eating too little. The boys tried not to get involved in this conflict, which is why they called Samuel for help. But in the end, everything was resolved without his intervention, as Millie received another portion of food. The girl attracted many with her beauty, so one of the guys shared his part with her. But this time, Rose was disgusted by the fact that even now, men were attracting her attention. Time flew by too quickly, so soon the Mister called all the patrollers to dinner. At that moment, the hero also took a rest, continuing to listen to the residents' conversations on the radio. He immediately noticed that there was a lack of trust in their group, which could soon lead to tragic consequences. And chaos began even earlier than the hero could have imagined, because people made a mistake. One of the men nevertheless opened the empty room, from which a dead man immediately jumped out at him. It was one of the weakest zombies, but even its appearance caused panic among people. Millie was sure that this dead man was different from the one she had seen before. From the men's screams, it became clear that they had finally opened the closed door, from which the zombie appeared. The speed of the dead was on par with that of humans, so this one quickly approached the nearest victim. It would have been better if the red-haired guy had actually acted alone, because then he wouldn't have fallen into this trap. In just a few seconds, the monster dealt with the man it had managed to catch. At the sight of this picture, Rose was overcome with such intense panic that the girl stopped thinking normally. Her life was so dear to her that she was the first to run down the corridor somewhere away. If Raya hadn't caught her friend, she could have gotten lost among the huge building. Samuel still insisted that they all had to stick together until the last moment. None of the guys were ready for a fight, but they couldn't just look at the zombies. So Mr. shouted to the people who couldn't fight properly because of fear. As a result, the boys armed themselves with at least some kind of weapon. Even if it was too weak, everything could have ended well if not for one oversight made by the stupid residents. When a person is bitten by a zombie, after a few minutes, he too turns into one of the dead. No one was mentally prepared for such a terrible turn of events, although people had heard about these horrors. But now they had to fight against two zombies at once, when they couldn't cope with even one. The boys didn't just stand there waiting to die, because it was better to do something. But the smoke screen from the fire extinguishers still wouldn't have held back the zombies for long. So Samuel boldly rushed into battle, showing by his example how to behave correctly. The man put almost all his strength into this blow, hoping that his attack would work. The residents watched his actions with delight, hoping that the mister would cope with one of the zombies. But the reality turned out to be much more terrible, since Samuel did not know the weak points of the dead. Never before had a man been so close to death, because he had nothing else to attack with. If it weren't for the timely help of one of the guys, the entire group would have lost their leader. But the zombie seemed not to react to any blow, as if he felt nothing but wild hunger. This behavior of the dead only frightened the people even more, who were not accustomed to fighting with these opponents. As soon as the young man became distracted, the second zombie boldly attacked him, as it was still not full. But this time, Samuel changed his approach to the fight. So he accidentally hit the head. Only this could kill the dead man, since otherwise his mind would continue to function. With such difficulty, the man dealt with one zombie, but their former comrade was still nearby. The zombie's very appearance frightened people so much that they were not prepared to approach. Only Samuel again pushed his assistants into action to deal with the enemy. The guys desperately drove the zombie into the smoke, trying to disorient it in space. But all this was of little help against the zombies, who still felt nothing but hunger. As a result, people had to flee, because they could not stand up even against such an enemy. In this situation, the girls were at a disadvantage because they ran much slower. But the worst thing was that in a panic, the residents pushed each other, and this led to the fall of one girl. Her name was Layla, and she had never encountered such cruel and horrible behavior before. The girl hoped until the very end that someone would come back for her. But this never happened. The dead felt no pity for anyone, because they saw in every person only prey. And now Layla has become a victim of the zombie, and even a desperate cry for help could not help her. She saw that Samuel was very close, but for some reason the man was in no hurry to help. Although Mr. always tried to be a leader, now he was very afraid for his life. So the man had no desire to save the girl who distracted the zombie. The betrayal stunned poor Layla so much that she no longer tried to scream. A little more and the zombie will reach the girl's neck, but no one will help her in such a terrible situation. Through the smoke from the fire extinguishers, she periodically saw Samuel's silhouette, which remained motionless. The man feared for his life more than anything else, so he ultimately chose inaction. This was the beginning of the end, although no one yet knew that the leader had acted so cowardly. Mr. had abandoned people before, but in the apocalypse world, such behavior led to death. All the residents of this house were just means for the leader to achieve his goal of survival. He was ready to sacrifice everyone, just to finally get out of this terrible place. There was no longer peace among the people, as they all became angry with each other in the critical situation. The guys acted like real cowards, as they were not ready to save the girls from the evil dead. Without a leading leader, these people could have continued to quarrel among themselves for a long time without achieving anything. One of the guys refused to take the blame, although he did push Layla aside. Only Samuel's appearance at the door stopped the arguments, which would not have led to anything good. The man lied to everyone that he had dealt with the zombie, but he was unable to save Layla before she was bitten. But it was the hero who actually killed the zombies, without trying to sacrifice any of the people. He rushed through the floors at lightning speed, gradually descending lower and lower. But for some reason, Ray never managed to find the treasure that was written about in the task. From time to time, the guy took a break, as he too was exhausted by such runs. What he didn't know was that there was a room in this place with surveillance cameras on all floors. They perfectly displayed everything that was happening in the building, although the cameras themselves were not visible. So soon, all the residents who came into this room found out that the hero was alive. A large number of zombie corpses lay on the upper floors, which Ray managed to clear out well. Samuel immediately realized that Sid Croft had also entered his apartment, because all the doors were open. This meant that the student had learned about Ira's body, which the gentleman had carefully hidden. From now on, the man could not allow Ray to live any longer without anyone knowing this terrible truth. While the hero was calmly clearing the floors, Samuel had already prepared a cunning plan against him. The leader reminded everyone that the schoolboy was strong enough to have already dealt with so many zombies, while they barely defeated one, losing some of their comrades and resources. And now the mister was inciting everyone to start a hunt for Ray in order to take away all his supplies. The villagers were not very keen on fighting against the man, especially since the leader had asked them to kill him. But Samuel was always a good liar, so he said that Sid Croft knew everything and did not come to the rescue. The man skillfully blamed Ray for all the losses of the residents, who were unable to cope on their own. Only Mealy did not succumb to this manipulation, since she knew well that Sid Croft was not like that. But Rhea suggested to her friend that now they should not confront all the remaining survivors. What could two weak girls do against guys who were overcome with intense rage? As long as such a skilled provocateur was around, people would never have been able to get to the bottom of the truth. Samuel enjoyed how quickly the villagers became enthusiastic about blaming Ray for everything. But the hero had no involvement in the events for which they tried to accuse him in absentia. But the mister didn't care about the guy. As long as no one found out about his murder of Ira, the man tried to behave with restraint, because unnecessary emotions would have aggravated the panic of the others. First, the leader wanted to use the cameras to find Sid Croft and then drive him into a trap. The boys were completely prepared to fight a human, because the schoolboy didn't scare them like a zombie. And only the girls were asked to sort out the supplies in order to distribute them among the people once again. This loneliness played into the hands of Rhea and Mealy, who just wanted to talk to each other secretly. Rose thought it was wrong that Samuel blamed Ray for all of their team's failures. They remembered that Sid Croft had a separate channel on his radio for talking. The girls felt obliged to warn the guy about the danger that was approaching him. Meanwhile, the young man slowly approached the first floor, as he had already cleared out all the others. But an ambush was already waiting for him behind the doors, and his friends did not have time to warn the hero about it. Ray was prepared to meet the zombie, but the axe that flew at him greatly surprised the young schoolboy. Of course, such a blow was not something difficult for Sid Croft, so he quickly dodged. But the guys outnumbered him several times over, and they weren't going to wait for Ray to hit back. However, even in such a bad situation for himself, the hero soon seized the initiative. So the assistants who had so much faith in Samuel's plan began to fly off the walls. No one could stand up to the guy who had survived not only reincarnation, but also battles with zombies. Before the men could even blink, none of them could fight properly anymore. In this situation, Ray was only interested in how the residents were able to track him down in the first place. Only one man remained unharmed so far, but he had no intention of fleeing. Although the outcome of the fight was predetermined, this man bravely took a strong blow from Ray. All this was just another trap, as another guy tried to attack the hero, but their movements were so slow that Ray easily parried all the blows. As a result, the residents suffered defeat once again, although they desperately tried not to give up. Sid Croft had no intention of leaving them alone until he knew the whole truth about the others' actions. But Samuel's manipulations worked so well on people that they were not ready for dialogue. Instead, the boys pounced on Sid Croft again as if he were their main enemy. But even after several years, their skills would not be enough to defeat young Ray. The guy didn't really want to waste time on such a showdown, but he still had no other choice. So all those who wanted to fly away from him so quickly, as if it was easier than easy for the young man. He saw every movement of his opponents down to the smallest detail, deep down regretting that they were not zombies. During the apocalypse, Sidcroft became accustomed to fighting both the dead and the insolent people. None of Mr.'s assistants could have imagined that the young schoolboy would be so strong. They overlooked the fact that the hero was stronger than the zombies that the boys were unable to deal with. Samuel watched from the sidelines as the battle, which looked more like a massacre, took place. Any hope he had that the assistants would deal with Ray due to their numbers was quickly dashed. So far, the man had no other plan. But Sidcroft had certainly managed to get the information he needed. At the first opportunity, the girls retired to discuss their next plan of action. They could no longer simply wait for Samuel to finally destroy their friend. Millie desperately tried to contact Ray using the radio, but the guy might not answer. Both girls were ready to pray to God if only Sidcroft would pay attention to their call. And as a result, the hero responded, so that his girlfriends could share the latest news with him. But they didn't take into account the fact that Mr. would definitely be watching everything that was happening around him. So, although Millie and Raya learned the truth about him, their lives were now in even greater danger. The hero was right to try to warn the girls, because he didn't want them to die at the hands of Samuel. But the situation eventually turned out in such a way that the Mr. found out about their secret conspiracy against him. And now, Ray had to choose whether he would save his friends at the cost of his own life. Millie and Raya didn't expect that everything would turn out so terribly for them. The hero didn't abandon the girls because he already had a plan that required zombies. But the leader was confident that victory would now remain his. Because what could one schoolboy do? What angered Rose most was that the man was now pointing a gun at them, even though they were in cahoots. But Samuel initially did not consider anyone here as friends, since only his life was important to him. At this point, Rhea still began to doubt that Sidcroft would come to their aid. The girl did not want to die for such a stupid reason, but she was unable to find salvation for herself. Soon they stopped in front of the doors from which Ray would emerge. Mr. remained just as ruthless towards the girls that he took prisoner for the sake of victory. Millie had no intention of betraying Sidcroft, as she hoped that he would really come for them. But Raya couldn't resist and decided that it would be better to appease the Mr. with some words. The girl was desperate to survive, and it was hard to blame her for such a strong desire. The leader recognized his qualities in Raya, so he allowed her to stand by his side and survive. And now only Millie remained in front of the door, behind which somewhere now Sidcroft was walking. The footsteps gradually approached the door, creating an increasingly oppressive atmosphere for the people. Samuel was ready to finish the battle with Ray with just one shot, so that the guy would no longer interfere. But everything didn't go according to his plan from the very beginning, as the hero released a horde of zombies. In this situation, Rhea found herself at a disadvantage because she sided with Mr. They both abandoned Millie near the zombies, as they were now only worried about their own lives. Poor Rose had never been so close to death, and despair took over her whole consciousness. There was no way she could have dealt with the zombies on her own, of which there were a huge number. But the girl didn't have to fight, since Ray would not leave her after such loyalty. The boy appeared just in time to save Millie, who waited for him despite her fear. Ray had to be especially careful after releasing so many zombies. Although this battle was something of a warm-up for him, Rose could have accidentally gotten hurt, so the young man hastened to give the girl a weapon so that she could defend herself at a critical moment. Sidcroft promised to kill all the zombies while Millie would hide from them somewhere near the entrance. The girl would never have thought that she would be so grateful to the schoolboy she teased. Meanwhile, Rhea and Samuel, who had run far ahead, were in big trouble. The girl betrayed her friend, and as a result, was unable to gain anything from it. It was because her life didn't matter to the leader, so he sacrificed Raya for himself. But even this only saved Samuel for a short time, since there were still too many zombies. The man ran to the last. But what could he do against such a huge crowd of dead people? In the end, they still caught up with the former leader, who was unable to save even himself in such a situation. And the last thing Samuel saw before he died was the face of his girlfriend, whom he killed. The hero did not even think about catching up with the man, because he still needed to find the treasure on his assignment. Ray was left to explore the top floor, which was now full of dead people. But the guy calmly dealt with each of them, since he had long ago learned all their weak points. Sidcroft waited impatiently for the rooms to be finished and for him to complete his mission. Meanwhile, Millie was waiting safely near the exit, but she was still shaking with fear. But soon the lights turned on throughout the building, which calmed the girl down a little because it was more pleasant that way. But Ray was still unable to complete the task, even though he opened every room in the building. The guy sincerely didn't understand what exactly he had missed, because he had methodically examined each room. At that moment, Mealy contacted him because she noticed something strange in the hall. Some huge portal appeared in front of her, and she didn't understand what to do with it now. Sidcroft couldn't join Rose right now, but asked her to enter the shelter. Soon, the girl was supposed to be joined by 4 more guys who remained alive. But the hero had a more difficult task, because a huge number of zombies found him. As usual, the guy had little time to reach the rescue zone in time. But Ray didn't even think about despairing, because he had already encountered such problems at the very end more than once. He advanced rapidly as his skills allowed him to perform incredible stunts. The zombies couldn't keep up with the hero, who was moving several times faster than them. If anyone saw Ray now, they would think he was performing a beautiful, deadly dance. Not a single zombie was able to dodge the blows, resulting in all of them dying soon after. The young man was noticeably exhausted at the very end, but at least almost the entire building was now cleared of the dead. The only thing that bothered Sidcroft was that he had never been able to complete the task from the dimension. But suddenly he heard the movement of the elevator, which had not been working before due to a lack of electricity. Only now did the young man realize that his task was much larger in scale than he thought. Despite the limited time before rescue, the young man still headed towards the elevator, and in it, he finally found the very treasure he had been looking for from the very beginning of the mission. The guy was incredibly happy that he managed to get some important information. The hero had not seen this map in his past life, so he still had to study it thoroughly. But problems were once again not long in coming, as the alarm sounded, and another crowd of zombies rushed towards Ray, attracted by this sound from all over the floor. It was not profitable for Sidcroft to fight the dead now, so he hurried away in the elevator. Its doors closed at the very last moment, saving the hero from a collision with the dead. For a moment, there was silence in the elevator cabin. But this peace did not last long, because the very next moment, the zombies again tried to get to the young man. They weren't afraid to fall towards him through the elevator shaft, because they didn't feel any pain anyway. Ray knew he had no time to fight the hungry dead. The elevator soon slowed down due to the overload, as the emergency system for such cases was activated. And this fall ended in zombie blood, because Sidcroft was not going to give up so easily. He was already consoled by the fact that the remaining survivors were already in the safety zone. The beautiful Mealy waited for Ray until the very end, although time was gradually running out. Only now did the boys realize what fools they had been to have listened to Samuel all this time. But Rose didn't care about the residents' repentance, because for some reason, Sidcroft still didn't show up. And at the very last moment, the hero still managed to get into the portal, although he was close to death. Immediately after this, the whole company returned to the real world, where it was a little safer. The boys could hardly believe that all their torment in that dimension had really ended, and only Mealy still trusted only Sidcroft, who had bravely saved her several times. But the hero didn't want to continue protecting Rose, who would be a burden to him everywhere. But Mealy had no idea what to do next, because even her close friend had betrayed her. She saw her life only next to the strong and reliable Ray, who could protect anyone. But initially, the guy came only for the portal, so he didn't want to linger around. However, Mealy's sincere tears still convinced the guy, whose heart had not completely hardened. So he suggested to the girl that she could go to a shelter, where she would be even safer. This place quickly opened after the start of the apocalypse for all surviving people. Although Ray had his own things to do, he still agreed to take Mealy to the shelter. The girl was so happy that she immediately agreed to obey the strong guy in everything. They had to walk several kilometers in the dark, since they tried not to turn on the lights. This is because zombies reacted strongly to any lighting and gathered in large crowds. Many people have died recently, and most of them have joined the dead. So Ray and Mealy had to move through the streets as quietly as possible to avoid being noticed. The guy confidently led the girl behind him, as he remembered where the shelter was located. To this day, Rose still couldn't understand why Sidcroft didn't fight those dead people. She thought the guy was strong enough to deal with all the zombies. But the hero knew well how quickly people attracted the dead with their voices. As soon as Rose opened her mouth, several dozen zombies instantly appeared around them. But the girl didn't realize that it would be better for her to remain silent if she wanted to stay alive. Until the guy covered Mealy's mouth, she continued to attract the zombies' attention. Rose only got in the way of the hero, but every time he continued to save her. Once the girl fell silent, Ray was able to focus on the quick battle with the dead. He tried to move as quietly as possible. Otherwise, the zombies would have become even more numerous in a short time. The sounds of their own kind did not attract the dead, but the noise from people immediately became noticeable. Mealy had no idea that Sidcroft could fight corpses so quickly and well. She suspected that the guy was strong, but only now did she see it with her own eyes. Ray looked like killing zombies was something easy for him, even though he had been weak before. Rose couldn't understand how the guy could change so much in such a short time. Personally, the girl was still not prepared for the apocalypse, although it had already arrived throughout the world. Soon, they were once again convinced that even in reality, it was no longer safe. A large number of covered corpses lay on the ground as a rescue team passed through. It was to her that the hero took his acquaintance, since he did not want to accept Mealy into his team. At that moment, they noticed how some girl suddenly decided to kill herself to avoid becoming a zombie. She fell bravely from a great height, since only death could save her. Seeing this, Ray immediately ran away with Mealy, since this noise would attract zombies. As sad as it was in this situation, Sidcroft could do nothing to help the stranger, so he had to do everything to ensure that her sudden death did not lead to others. During the apocalypse, the hero became accustomed to being constantly surrounded by the dead, but this time he still heard the living, since the rescue team was nearby. But they had huge problems, as the zombies were growing in number every minute. The men were forced to gradually retreat as they ran out of ammunition at a breakneck pace. But they bravely held the line with all their might to protect the surviving civilians. Only one person decided that his life was more important than the lives of everyone else. He was willing to use several people as bait to save himself. But the military did not support such proposals, since their task was to save everyone. So the children of rich parents had to silently hope that the soldiers would break through. Ray was about to pass by until he noticed one important person among the military. It was the captain of the team of soldiers who had often saved Sidcroft from death in the past. Stephen Dovby personally stood at the forefront to fight the huge crowds of zombies. Despite the danger, the hero could not abandon this man, so he took Mealy with him. The more the soldiers fired, the more zombies were attracted by the loud noise. If this continued, Stephen would soon have to retreat. But the hero appeared just in time to show the commander how to act correctly. The guy boldly switched to hand-to-hand combat, because only this strategy would lead to victory. Sidcroft was not afraid of zombie bites because he moved faster than any of the undead. At first, Dovby tried to call on the schoolboy to retreat, since fighting was too dangerous. But Ray came to prove that hand-to-hand combat was the most effective. The guy knew all the zombies' weak spots well, so he saw no point in running away from the battle. He crushed the dead so quickly that the military could hardly keep track of Ray's actions. In a few minutes, the hero reduced the number of zombies nearby, but he was in no hurry to stop there. Now he was driven not by a desire for revenge, but by the opportunity to thank Stephen for saving him. That is why the hero did not even think of retreating, although his life was in serious danger. Quite quickly, Dovby realized that the students' actions were indeed producing results. So soon, the captain ordered all the military to put their noisy weapons aside. Although the fighters were afraid of this, Stephen always suppressed any objections to his orders. Only thanks to such cooperation did the soldiers soon defeat all the zombies in the area. Dovby was filled with incredible respect for the guy who helped them deal with the crowd of dead people. The man realized how wrong he was when he tried to rely on weapons in battle. As a token of gratitude, Ray asked the captain to take Mealy with them to the shelter. But Dovby would have wanted to ensure Sidcroft's safety as well, because the boy deserved to live. However, the hero's plans did not include visiting the shelter, as he still had a lot of things to do. So he helped with preparing the vehicles, but he himself did not want to go with the military. Rose worried until the very end about whether she should have stayed with the strong Ray. The only thing that stopped the girl was that she would be a burden for the guy, who acted alone. Before Mealy had time to get into the car, one of the impudent guys said some nasty things to her. The rich man's behavior angered the hero so much that he taught him several important lessons. Since the guy was very worried about his face, he no longer dared to speak in front of anyone. At this point, the hero's first meeting with Stephen ended, as it was time for the military to leave. Although Dovby was a little worried about the schoolboy, he believed that the boy could cope on his own. As soon as the soldiers left, the hero began to study the very map that he found on the mission. Previously, he himself remembered the location of the portals, but he had no idea what was in the gray zone. So the first thing he did was go to Elok. but he didn't dare wake her from her deep sleep. The hero needed time to think, so he gave the girl the opportunity to rest. At that moment, Ray had no idea that he had radically changed Captain Stephen's future. The man would like to continue saving people, but his superiors suddenly gave him another assignment. Even now, money was important to some people, so the leader caved in to the big shots. They turned out to be Roger's group, who were not going to die so quickly during the apocalypse. Dovby tried to refuse this assignment until the very end, because he wanted to help the survivors. But Nucci was one of those who financed the shelter, so the captain had no other choice. The leader promised to find more soldiers for rescue missions while Stephen was with Roger. This is how the blonde found himself a good protector, since his influence was enormous. By morning, Sidcroft had cleared out the entire laboratory, moving the equipment into his huge inventory. Only this finally woke up Sinti, who was very tired after all the adventures. The guy made sure that his assistant gained strength before setting off on the journey with him. At breakfast, he had just told Elok about his plan, and she was not against helping the leader. So soon, the two of them set off to the first place on the map to explore it. Zombies, as usual, appeared unexpectedly, trying to bite off at least a piece from people. Until now, Eloka was so scared every time that panic completely overwhelmed her. But gradually, the girl became better at resisting the dead who were always nearby. Ray watched Cynthia's actions closely while trying to teach her hand-to-hand combat. Sidcroft was afraid of losing such a smart employee, because Eloka had not participated in battles in the past. For now, they had nothing to fear, as all the nearby streets were free of zombies. But Ray knew that this lull was temporary, so he asked Cinti not to relax along the way, and soon another portal was ready to open right in the place where the friends were. As a result, they both ended up in another dimension, but they were scattered in different directions. This place was no different from other dangerous zones where the hero constantly received tasks, and now he had to unite with the survivors in order to find a way out of here. But just a moment later, the mission showed that one of the people had died so quickly. This greatly worried the hero, who hoped that he would soon be able to find an assistant. In the meantime, he had to move at random through a huge building inhabited by zombies. Sidcroft had no clue where he should go first. The buildings around stretched for many kilometers, and Cinti could be anywhere. While the young man was lost in his thoughts, he suddenly heard a plaintive squeak asking for help. Since this time he needed to unite with people, Ray boldly went forward. But something went wrong right from the start, as the hero was in for an unpleasant surprise. Although the voice sounded human, it was actually coming from one of the zombies. Ray didn't expect zombies to evolve so much that they could set traps. Moreover, this dead man moved so fast that he could easily kill a person. If Sidcroft had not possessed incredible skills, he would certainly have met his end. But the guy quickly deceived the dead man, although he was distinguished by his cunning and treachery in battle. Now the young man was even more worried about Eloku, who might come to the aid of such a zombie. Meanwhile, another person fell into the trap, as the dead were merciless to everyone. But Ray managed to come to the aid of the unknown girl in time to successfully complete the mission. The guy was glad that this time he had to save other people, not kill them. Things were no better for Cindy, who found herself in the very center of an abandoned hospital. The girl tried her best to follow Ray's lessons in order to hold out until he arrived. Eventually, she soon managed to kill one zombie on her way, as she approached from behind. But even these simple actions took a lot of effort from Cinti and made a lot of noise, so it was no surprise that she heard other zombies approaching the area. The dead quickly found people by the noise, and now they were carefully searching around.